It is a long list, so hopefully we can try to contain ourselves just a little bit, because I know that talking about fantasy races is hella fun. And like in previous episodes, we've done that before, but you know, I'm pretty sure not all of us here want to be here for 4 hours, right? So
I took a nap to be here, so like, yeah, I'm good.
Let's go. 4-hour episode.
You good to edit that, Dean? That's all right? No problems. No problems.
You gotta do it, man. You gotta do it.
I'm just.
You've been told. You have no option in this.
5-hour episode.
Edited at the dentist appointment.
Just go to fucking therapy.
If I develop Sims, delete the channel.
We need to start a revolution.
And you know what? I'm gonna say it.
All of them are fucking idiots.
25 is technically used.
Say your morning routine.
And that's fucking it. Excuse me? Where my Grisha's at? Yo.
I'd like you to rephrase that, Sam.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Tonight, we are doing another loaded episode, as I like to call it. It's pretty much just an open discussion, and I have a whole bunch of people here with me tonight. So, Alex.
Hello.
Gabe.
Hello.
Tyler.
Hello.
Marie-Soleil.
Hey there.
And Charbel.
Hello.
Tonight, we're going to be talking about vampires, werewolves, and other fantasy races. How tonight will work for such a very broad topic, and like I said, a very loaded episode, is we're not going to be going through set topics like how we've done before, because lately with loaded discussions like this, especially with a lot of people, we tend to get lost in conversation anyway, and to be honest, that's kind of our most authentic. It's something I really enjoy, and it's everyone thing for such a mutual interest in fantasy races. Why script it, right? Or why try to control it? That being said, we do have a couple of guidelines. We've been recording for like a couple of minutes now, so it may be a long one, just as a precursor. I don't know how long tonight will be. We'll be going through like 12 primary fantasy races. It's probably some of the more general ones, but we can always expand on those, and I will not be saying that right now. That is just for everyone's listening or in the timestamps. But also we'll be splitting the discussion in roughly 2 ways, or as much as we can. So we'll be talking about how these fantasy races are written in the media, as well as how we've kind of handled our own writing of them. And I believe that's it. No check-in, no mid-episode segment, as again, will be a long night. So let's not waste any more time, and let's get right into the first of our listed fantasy races, and that is vampires.
Can I just say, first of all, I love vampires, which probably surprises no one, but I find it interesting that we've decided to title this Vampires and Werewolves as our primary like fantasy races, because those are races I don't usually associate with fantasy.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned that way before we even did podcasts, like when we were all still just talking. Like when you said that, I honestly couldn't really believe you, because like vampires and werewolves just seem to be like big fantasy creatures, and to like when I was thinking about it, it's like, shit, there aren't really a lot of vampires and werewolves in high fantasy, is there?
There's not. They're not a high fantasy races. They're usually more associated with like supernatural and like horror stuff, which I tend to differentiate quite heavily from fantasy, even though there's a lot of overlap in a lot of cases.
They're also human passing. And I find in fantasy they come in like urban fantasy, you could say you find them more in. But it's, from what I've seen, like when looking at them, you can't tell that they aren't human at first glance. There's always something else, something about like their skin, their teeth, they only change in the full moon or when they wish to change, but for the most part, they can pass as human.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the most like stereotypical fantasy, just going off our list: humans, elves, orcs, goblins, dragons.
That's just Tolkien. That's why.
Yeah. Well, I was also gonna say like merfolk, undead, fucking dragons and fairies.
There goes me
fairies.
saying in the beginning, "Hey, I won't say what our list of topics is."
Oh shit! Sorry, I didn't name them all though. I didn't name them all.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
So I do have an interesting point on claiming that vampires and werewolves are not high fantasy. And for the most part, I do agree. When it comes to vampires and werewolves, urban fantasy or their own genre per se is my preference for their station. However, we did mention Tolkien already, and I'm glad we did, because Tolkien had both vampires and werewolves. It's not a large part of the setting, not by a long shot. But, and you cannot quote me on this, it's been forever since I've read the Silmarillion. In the Silmarillion, there is a description of Sauron, and this is when he is still serving the evil big bad Morgoth before he is transported into the stars or whatever the hell happened to him. Silmarillion's a wild ride, and I believe he was noted as something called the Vampire of the West, if I remember correctly, and he did in fact have the form of a bat and drain people's life energies. Now, Sauron has had a lot of forms throughout Lord of the Rings, but that was one of his original titles. And there's also a very great wolf or two that appears in the Silmarillion. So I do agree that they're not your typical high fantasy genre pieces, but interesting note, they do appear in one of the most famous ones. And I love vampires and werewolves, so yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I think it's interesting. Like, I find it fascinating that in Tolkien's book, because I didn't ever know that, but like, whenever I associate vampires, I think just focusing on vampires for a minute, like vampires, I've always associated with gothic horror or like urban fantasy, like Marie-Soleil said. And I think lately, the latter of which is just because it's been a thing since Twilight, I think really made it one of the most popular, I guess. Like, it's
this is Vampire Diaries Erasure.
Sorry, like,
yeah, I was about to say L.J. Smith, Anne Rice. Excuse me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Like, there is everyone fact checking for me, but like for me, like Twilight was probably the biggest one that I was aware of, and because of that, like urban fantasy vampires. Actually, if I can entertain that for a minute, like urban fantasy vampires have really been different across, like they've had like a lot of the familiar characteristics of vampires. Like a lot of them are bloodsuckers, can't go out in the sun, what is it, like can possibly transform into a bat, like a lot of the key characteristics that is coming from, you know, Count Dracula, who is like the vampire. But in urban fantasy, when it makes it, or when you are obviously writing in vampires, that seems to be more common compared to high fantasy. And while they do share a lot of characteristics, there is still, I think personally, what like bugs me about urban fantasy vampires is just the fact that like the depictions,
they're boring.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. The depictions are boring. Like,
where's
they
the horror?
Yeah, like, well, what is it? Like, not every, you can always take different fantasy races, and the ones that we have here, there are always different ways of taking it. But with vampires, just the idea of them is always rooted in some kind of shock and some kind of, I guess like some kind of tension. Like, it doesn't always have to be horror related, but that there always should be something shocking and something very high tension-esque, I guess, when you're discussing vampires. And in urban fantasy, it's just been so watered down.
Well, I was gonna say, like, is Twilight urban fantasy? Because I thought of it more as like a romance. Like, I wouldn't compare the two.
I would classify Twilight as like a supernatural romance.
Okay, that makes sense because I'm like, to me, a fantasy vampires, I don't know. Like, it has the usual setup of, large scale vampire civilizations and a lot of world lore and stuff like that. Like, you wouldn't really get that in Twilight. Like, I haven't read. I think I've seen one of the movies.
I mean, there is like vampire lore in Twilight. It's just not the focus because it's a love. It's a romance. I'm putting that in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
Yeah.
But
It's also not traditional vampire lore. It's very different from what most people know as vampire lore.
Like, I've only read a little bit of Dracula the original, and I used to read when I was a kid. I had to search this up. Vampire Plagues by Sebastian Rook. Right. Those are sick. Those are really gruesome, and those are the vampires I grew up with.
Mm-hmm. I think, like, when I think of like horrific vampires, there was this. One of my favorite guilty pleasure movies is Priest, that stars Paul Bettany. The vampires in it,
a sick movie.
Yeah, it's not a great movie by any standards, but it is a guilty pleasure movie for me because in one part the vampires look fucking horrific. Like, they're on all fours, have no eyes, and they have like very pronounced fangs that are very familiar with vampires. It's an amazing look. And while that in itself isn't like a very, more or less, it's not like a very like amazing description. Like vampires in Priest are very monstrous, and they're very they're like a horde monster. But still, like, compared to like that movie came out in 2013, back at or like somewhere in the early 2010s, at the height of like vampires in urban fantasy. Which, to actually touch on the Vampire Diaries, didn't we? I feel like we either talked about that on podcast or that was probably like off something else. But like, how are vampires depicted in Vampire Diaries?
God, it's been a really, really long time since I read them. We talked about it recently because Jenny Nicholson released a video about it, and someone sent. I think I sent it to the group chat because it was really funny, or Gabe sent it. It's a good video, but from what I remember, they can go in the sun. They're like immortal. They can turn into an animal, usually not specifically a bat. I believe like one of them can turn into a wolf, one of them can turn into like a tiger. So they can turn into like cool animals. And they're hard to kill. Like, they need like specific weapons to kill them.
So, if I can remember correctly, they can go in the sunlight when they have a special ring. It's an enchanted ring.
Yes, that's what it
protects them. Yeah. And there's a plant, not garlic, but I think it's vervain. Vervain?
Yeah, that sounds right.
That repels them. And the stronger the vampire is, the more powers that they have. So while Damien, thank you, has been drinking more human blood and all of this, he can transform into, I think he transforms into both like a bat and a wolf. His brother Stefan, who has not been drinking as much human blood, cannot shapeshift.
They also need permission to enter somebody's house. That's one of the lore. Yeah, that's one of their lore rules.
That's an old lore rule, yeah. And there's another thing in the Vampire Diaries with the special woods to kill them that only counts for the oldest of them, the originals, that they'd need a special type of wood to kill them or to at least injure them. With the younger ones, like Damon and Stefan, anything could kill them.
I think it's the introduction of like different objects that help change the traditional like lore, I think, of vampires. It makes it sound really interesting. For like the premise of Vampire Diaries vampires, like, oh, that's cool. Because compared to Twilight, like, there's probably some kind of justification for it, but I remember Edward stepping out into the sun and he started like burning up, I think. And I'm like,
no, they glitter in the sun.
I was air quoting. I really didn't want to have to say that because it's like there has to be some reason for this. There really needs to be some reason for this.
It's
Why is he just
their
glittering?
skin's made out of diamonds. Twilight vampires can only be killed by like vampires or like werewolves, basically, or fire. If you have fire, you can burn them. Because I've
in Twilight aren't actually werewolves. They're shapeshifters. This is
that's
real
true.
breaking
There
dawn.
I
There
know.
are technically werewolves in Twilight lore, but we never actually get to meet them. They're just like mentioned offhandedly in the fourth book, and it's really disappointing. But yeah, like I remember there's like a lore point where even if you like rip their body into pieces, the pieces can still like find each other and like knit back together. So like the only way to kill them is like rip them apart and set them on fire.
Okay, so she wrote a novella that actually goes into more details on that. It's about Bree, the one new like young vampire that they kills.
Bree Tanner.
Yeah, that one. And I guess she gets her ear ripped off at one point and then uses her venom to like put it back together. Like, you know, the vampires in Twilight have a venom that's what turns other people into vampires. And she like licks her torn off ear to put venom on it and reattaches it.
Oh my god, I have no memory of that.
I remember correctly.
Hilarious.
Sick.
That's so funny.
That's pretty fucking metal.
Yeah, that's nuts. Holy shit.
So, one thing, and this is something I've had a thought on for a while, is why the fuck are vampires and werewolves literally always together? We can't have a universe with one without the other existing. We go from Underworld to Twilight to the Vampire Diaries
To Resident Evil 8.
anything by L.J. Smith, Resident Evil 3. Why are these two so intrinsically linked, it seems, despite the fact that their mythoses come from very different parts? I know vampires are spread all over the world, and werewolves to some extent are as well, but there's no true human myths relating to the cohesion of these two apparently mythical monsters, besides, you know, the typical thing of monster fuck really like both these races, which is probably also says something for why they've become so popular. But why is it that we have to have both? We can never just have one anymore.
That I agree with that. And who started that? I feel like it has to be some media marketing thing, like some movie or some book. Just blow it out of proportion, and they're like, this combination works. We should always have it like that together.
I think, like, for me...
I think it's...
Oh, sorry, Gabe, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's like... It might have probably have something to do with, like, night connotations. Like,
Yeah, they're two
sense.
like, big creatures of the night, I think.
Yeah,
Also-
it's like...
Also, in a lot of cases, they're often put in like opposition to each other. I think people like having the idea of like two supernatural races that are like inherently enemies.
Yeah. I also wouldn't mind, like, it's been a long time, but remember Van Helsing? Like, I always liked the idea of the human just hunting down these supernatural creatures. That was a long time ago, that movie.
I don't know. I think, like, to touch on what we had been saying, yeah, I think there's just something about, like, pitting these two, like, infamous monsters together that's just so interesting. Like, they've dominated, like, what is essentially like fantasy monsters for so long. Like, it's... I don't know. I can probably come up with different parallels. Like, werewolves are typically grounded based. Vampires can turn into bats, so that gives them an aerial advantage. There seems to be like different transformations that's always at odds. Like vampires I think they undergo pretty much the same ritual, so someone has to appoint them, I guess, or they have to turn someone else into a like vampires turn to vampires, werewolves turn other werewolves. Like yeah.
I think I'm trying to think of like examples where like it breaks the rule and it doesn't have, like, one of my favorite examples of a werewolf in fiction is like Bloodborne, and like, and at least I don't remember there being vampires in Bloodborne, but I think it has something to do with like because Bloodborne's all about like body horror and stuff. So like it's the idea of like transforming into a werewolf is like horrifying, but like you don't really transform into a vampire.
Well, and this goes back to the combination of the two species, is that the bite is one of the most common things between both of them. And
Right.
it's kind of regardless of the type, because some vampires, you have to feed them vampire blood to turn them. Some it's just a bite, some it's a ritual. Some werewolves, you have to just bite the person. Some you have to be born into it. There's many different
Some
types.
scratch. I've heard of that one before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's the bite is the most visceral thing for humans to put together is, something's nibbling on you. So these two things must be pseudo related. And I also think it ties back to the original Dracula, because I have read the OG Dracula from way back when. And interesting enough, I think it was the original play, Dracula turns into both a bat and a wolf at a certain point, right? Which is very interesting to think about, maybe our craze sort of came from there, but what we were really thinking of was a vampire turning into a wolf at that point in time, and that sort of extrapolated outwards.
Personally, I can't really like see like fantasy without either of them. I think more or less it just kind of it just kind of depends on how the medium is handling it, right? Like, it's like Tyler had said, it's kind of hard to separate these two nowadays, and that doesn't mean that like it's the sole focus can be on both of them at the same time. Maybe one has more of a bias. Like if I can recall Skyrim, one of the big DLCs Dawnguard has more emphasis on the vampire story, while still touching briefly on the werewolf story, but werewolves in Skyrim aren't really that complex to begin with. Personally, writing out these two creatures into my world, Xeno, it's one thing to kind of relate or like depend or like dig into some of the traditional aspects of these characters, but they share a lot of similarities between each other that it's kind of hard to like write one or to not write one without the other. Personally.
So I was just skimming through a Wikipedia article on werewolves, and apparently the ancient Greeks before the 19th century thought that if a werewolf wasn't properly destroyed after death, it would come back as a vampire. And then as like a vampire wolf or hyena, it would prowl along battlefields drinking the blood of injured and dying soldiers.
Oh, that's so cool.
So it's the Greeks' fault.
Well,
it all goes back to the Greeks.
Always the Greeks' fault.
I also saw. I can't excuse my French, but yeah, I saw one as like on Wikipedia. It's 12th century. It's called The Werewolf. I'm not gonna say the French version, but there's I'm like looking through. I saw that one for the Greek.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's trippy. It's been there for a while.
I think. Oh, sorry, Tyler. Go ahead.
Well, I was about to say you were talking about your experience in writing them, and I've dabbled plenty, and was wondering if I could discuss some of my more unique concepts for the two.
It's funny you say that because that's what I was about to say. Yeah, because on podcasts before, Gabe, Alex, and I have talked they certainly have talked about their vampires so much. Like, it's kind of caused me to write in my own vampires. But yeah, I'd love to talk about it's one thing in the InkGuild multiverse. I don't know what the fuck to call it, but yeah, let's talk about our vampires and werewolves.
InkGuild canon. I like InkGuild canon.
Yeah.
Quick little research preface, because upon looking at the list of races we were attempting to discuss today, I'm not going to go through them all, don't worry. It re-sparked this old bit of knowledge I have, which is a writing template for fantasy, in that you have to have races that fill certain niches within a fantasy setting. You have to have something that has an aged perspective, such as the long-lived races of elves or vampires. You have to have a brutish perspective. You have to have a craftsman perspective. You have to have an other perspective. And if you can follow these archetypes, even if they're not the traditional races that fit into them, you'll find that you can, make a very cohesive fantasy setting, because a lot of those interactions are already in place. Now, vampires is honestly a weird one to fit in. They usually fall into the other section, and I tend more towards a horror bent with them. I've read plenty of the young adult teen fiction vampire love stories, but one example that pops into mind that I really liked was a movie called 30 Days of Night. Vampires live up in the Arctic Circle because guess what? For several months out of the year, it's completely dark and there's no sun. And they can just live there. They don't give a shit about the cold. That's great. And my most recent vampire comes in that sort of horror sense. And I'll try and make this quick. It's a science fantasy setting, my mythic cosmos, where I've taken as many fantasy races, tropes, monsters, and sort of put them into a greater science fantasy universe. And vampires is one of my pride and joys of it. Long time ago, humans discovered cloning. We've got a little bit of that now. But when you clone something, it is not an exact copy. It is its own creature. It has its own experiences. You can't put your own brain into it and have the same soul, per se. So what was then developed was a sort of exocortex true cloning, where you basically make a meat suit and then download your brain into said meat suit. Only the very rich and powerful could do this. And the rich and powerful started sucking up all the resources required to do this so that they could live forever, as you do when you become a horrible, horrible capitalist. As such, they started looking for more creative ways to get the required resources for their meat suits. And they started looking at disposable prison systems and those on death row, and started sucking up the prison populations. Everyone thought this was great. These random prisoners are just dying. Then it was found out what they were doing. These CEOs and whatnot were ostracized from society. But considering the amount of wealth and resources they had, they usually escaped from persecution. They went to live on their private ships in hidden asteroid alcoves and stations that they'd paid for in advance, and they brought their little meat suits and machines to make them with them. And now they prey on the fringes of society, grabbing poor traders that get lost on their routes, or overwhelming little bands of interstar mercenaries, sucking them up and turning them into meat suits. And that is my current vampire. Ooh. Ageless old CEOs who are kind of assholes.
Damn.
Nice. That's sick.
It doesn't go off the traditional like bite or turning. But again, the whole point of my setting is to take these things, extrapolate, and change them. Mm-hmm. So that is my most recent vampire, and I'm quite in love with it. My first story in this setting is going to be about one.
Yeah, that's sick. Yeah, I've to comment on my own vampires. Yeah, I don't know if subverted is the right word for it, but I've taken a lot of the traditional tropes that are associated with vampires and kind of made it my own. My vampires are known as the Ivania, so that's YVANNA or NNIA. They are Atroxian, so they are basically dragon folk. And the story behind the Ivania it kind of stretches back to the gods that the Atroxians believe in. So they believe in three gods, essentially, or three dragon spirits. Odiris, the high spirit of the clouds, Kiora, the high dragon of the mountains, and Unoro, the high dragon of the blood. So that's basically, it's pretty much just the big three of Greek mythology: Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Unoro is the youngest of the dragon siblings, and was probably the most fierce of the three. Like, he had the most cunning, and he was very strategic, and he was very brutal at times. He also had a temper for pretty much everything and everyone, including his own siblings, and that factored into the creation of the Ivania, because when Unoro feared the Atroxians, undisciplined and very much without governance, Odyrus decided that he would let them just find that themselves, but Unoro was like, no, that's a bad idea. You can't let these people do that. So he plotted, and because Odyrus was so stubborn, Unoro planned to kill him with Kiora's help. Long story short, because I can always elaborate on that in a separate episode, Unoro's plan failed, and as a punishment, Odyrus clipped Unoro's wings. So from a dragon, he now became a drake. He was cast down below the mountains, and he's forever been linked with evil, selfishness, and murder. The Ivania factor into the creation of vampires, because there was an Atroxian woman, Ivan Rulok. She was planning to overthrow the reigning king of Atrox at the time, and she made a blood oath to Odyrus, which then gave her the powers that would typically be associated with a vampire. So blood drinking, heightened senses, shapeshifting. But I've kind of taken out the fact that vampires can't go in the sun. They can go in the sun. And they prefer to kind of live by themselves. They're a very powerful race, and really the only way to kill them, I haven't drafted in the exact method yet, but basically the way to kill an Ivania is through, I think it's through gold-plated weapons, like gold weapons. Because if you're going to think, Ivan wanted to kill the king of Atrox out of lust for greed, out of power, so why not kill them with the very thing that the master wanted? And so the Ivania was pretty much outcast. They had to so when Ivan was defeated, the Ivania retreated to the northern parts of the continent after almost being driven to extinction, and a lot of them have been planning their revenge for many years. But one key character that one of my key characters, his name is Alo Sikoba. He is a Ivania, and he'll be factoring into the narrative hopefully soon. But yeah, those are my vampires.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I like it that you got rid of the idea of them that they can't live in the sun, because I sort of did the same thing. But for me, real quick, last time I did one, what I did, just long story short, is basically two kingdoms are fighting. They send their armies in through this canyon, right? The two armies are fighting. It lasts a long time. They run out of supplies, and it's hard to get to supplies because it's a mountainous region or whatever. Anyways, I had the idea of the soldiers are desperate for supplies, and they're all starving. They're all dropping dead, and obviously the dead from the battles. So they start to cannibalize and eat the corpses of their dead men. And from there, I was like, what if they become vampires through eating the corpses of their own men? And they basically formed their own kingdom from there, where I just gave them they can sit in the sun, supernatural, superhuman strength. Because I was like, what if they're eating other people's meat and blood, they can just grow stronger than the other humans. So they're just not gonna say super buff, but faster and quicker than the average man. And that was basically it. They just became their own separate kingdom, but they basically got to the point where they'd start hunting down they're very an isolationist kingdom that anyone who goes through it just gets slaughtered. And I can't remember the reasoning I had for why they go. It was something about a bigger war, and their land was easier way to get through. So the main character had to go there to negotiate with them. I had a sick scene where they're just standing over the cliffs and they're watching them from afar. I've always loved that scene in a movie.
Nice. I think so. I'm familiar with Alex and Gabe's vampires, but I think before we get to them, Marie-Soleil, have you written in your own unique vampires before?
I haven't really written my own unique vampires. I kind of have an idea of werewolves that's partially stolen from different places, but not vampires.
Do you want to touch on that? Because I guess we're talking about vampires and werewolves in conjunction with each other, so.
Okay, so the main thing I stole this from was Werewolf Rescue Group, I think is what the book is called. It's the sequel to a reformed vampire support group where these vampires meet up and they basically like an AA meeting, and they talk about how it kind of sucks to be a vampire, but like it could be worse. And they drink guinea pig's blood and take a bunch of vitamins to offset these symptoms of vampirism.
That's hella cool, actually. Oh my god.
They are really good books. One of the vampires ends up being killed by a vampire hunter, which leads them to finding a werewolf fight ring. Now, this is not werewolves wanting to fight. This is like a dog fight being organized by humans with werewolves that they've purchased and acquired through less than legal means, because these are human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the books, in the book itself, the werewolves are from like it's the seventh son in a family that tends to be from like Puerto Rico or Spanish descent. And I kind of changed it a little bit and wrote this short story about a group of werewolves that actually have like a fight ring that they organize every full moon. And well, in like my little short story, the werewolves didn't only change during the full moon. They changed whenever they felt like it. But it just was cool for them to organize these fights during the full moon because they're dorks in and of themselves. Or at least the original ones were. And but you'd have there's this one skinny werewolf that couldn't fight at all, but he ran the bets and everything, and he turned into this like tiny dog. And then you'd have like this buffed up, like he was totally on steroids, but it was like I never actually said it in the writing. Because my werewolves could use steroids. And he wasn't allowed to fight anymore because of this, and he would just stand behind this nerdy guy who was taking bets. It was lovely. It's a lovely little short story that I wrote and found it when we were looking at what we're doing right now, the podcast prompts.
Yeah.
And I think the main difference between common werewolves and my werewolves was the like they didn't have a pack per se. These werewolves just lived and they had their lives. There was no alpha wolf or pack dynamic, as you find a lot of times in modern werewolf stories.
Mm-hmm.
But also not really lone wolf. Like,
did you say and in shit men?
Yeah.
Fair. Continue.
And like they could change when they wanted to. They were sort of shapeshifters, but not, because like I had other shapeshifters that could turn into whatever animals they wanted, and these guys could only turn into wolves.
Ooh.
I can't remember. There's something else, but I can't remember it. I'm sorry.
That sounds really cool. How long have you been developing that?
This was a while ago, and I literally found, like, I forgot I was writing it. I'm pretty sure it started as fan fiction for the original, like, the books I was talking about before, and just kind of devolved, and I was like, there need to be more werewolves in the world than we would get if they were only the seventh son of a family. Like, I need more werewolves in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, werewolves really deserve a lot better. Everyone loves the vampires. You just gotta give some love to... I don't know what I'm on about. I'm sorry. Gabe,
there's a trope that I've seen with werewolves that tend to have werewolves as like Native American or like non-white characters, and then
Yikes!
vampires as
It's
white
really bad. Yeah,
people.
Oh God.
yeah. That's a bad trope. If you're listening to this, stop that. Don't do it. It's really racist,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Where is my people of color vampires? Because that shit is hot. Anyone watched the Anne Rice, what is it? Vampire Queen?
That's a recommendation for everybody.
Anne Rice is a bitch and she can fight me.
Okay.
Fair.
Okay.
Very fair.
She writes really
Okay.
hot vampire sex scenes. She does.
Wasn't there a black vampire in Twilight, or am I tripping out?
Yeah, but he
Yeah,
was a
was.
villain.
He was a villain.
He was in the movie, and the author fought against having him there, and it
was.
there's
I'm
a
pretty
whole
sure
thing.
I saw a thing where like the original director was like, "Oh, we should make like Alice like Asian," and was like trying to like diversify the whole cast, and she was like, "No." And eventually they managed to make Laurent black, and she's like, "Well, it's okay because he's the villain."
Oh, what
You,
the
Stephanie Meyer.
Stephanie Meyer is a bad person.
Fuck you.
Not a fan.
All right. Anyway, Gabe, it's been a while since I've touched in with the vampires from Glass Inferno. You want to catch us up to speed?
Yeah, sure. I haven't really changed anything about them because I'm extremely happy with like how they are. But I'd be delighted to go over them again because I like talking about them.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Do it.
everyone.
Do it.
Okay,
They're cool.
okay.
We love them.
It was
All
one
right.
of them, yeah. It was like half
Okay, so-
like it was your vampires and Alex's vampires that made me write in my own.
I love gushing about these guys. I wrote them and I was like, this is I don't even know if I want to write the rest of the story because it's not about them strictly. But so basically, Glass Inferno is in a world called Ildry, and in Ildry there's a country very very far to the north on I guess the northeast side, Titania, and Titania is infamous for extremely harsh climates and like brutal temperatures, horrible. It's basically like it's known as the worst place on Earth or the worst place in the world there, and it wasn't always like this. It used to be like a semi-habitable place, and there was people there, but when environmental collapse came there, this was basic like this is like several thousand years before the story takes place. It's not a global warming thing. This is just shit just got fucked up for spoiler reasons. But when environmental collapse came, it was basically the innermost population had no escaping, so they were basically just trapped there while the climate became completely uninhabitable. It's basically so cold there that most intruders on to Titania who like don't have the proper protections become known as the Walking Dead because they freeze so quickly that they don't even have time to fall over. The cold just burrows right into them and they're just dead. It's almost instant.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones who survived, they survived long enough that they eventually started becoming vampires, and there's a long process for how this happened that involves this godlike creature called the Blood Raven, who essentially gave them vampirism, but the vampirism is also characterized by like where they are. So a big thing with the blood is that so essentially what happened was because of the fact that like you couldn't really cook anything and you couldn't farm, the only obtainable way to like really sustain themselves was animal blood, which they had to get like while the animal was still alive, because if they killed an animal it would freeze too quickly. So they basically had to bleed animals alive. That sort of with the Blood Raven, that sort of transformed into a bloodthirst, and like that became a critical part of Titanian culture. And then when the whole sunlight thing is because of they are now so adapted to the cold that some of them don't even need to like wear extra protective gear in the snow. They can basically just be crazy shirtless snow vampires. And the downside of this though is that since there's no sunlight in Titania, if they go basically anywhere else whenever the sun is out, they basically explode. Their bodies are so adapted to the cold that their blood has become one of the most explosive substances in the world. So like exposure to like large amounts of heat, be it sunlight or fire, basically causes them to combust. So yeah, that's basically how they formed. I think the reason that that I love talking about them though is that they sort of formed this like sort of Russian steampunk, more dieselpunk, I guess, dieselpunk culture in the snow, and they have like all these crazy metal structures. It's something totally out of the way of like anything else that's in Ildry. They're just very like they all wear fucking these crazy gas masks and stuff, and they have like they're very inspired by the Wolf Brigade, if anyone's seen that.
Mm-hmm. I have
So
not.
ah so
Unfortunately,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
those are Titanians. As far as werewolves are concerned, I used to have werewolves in Glass Inferno in very early versions of the story when it was an urban fantasy and not just a high fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But I eventually scrapped them because I was like, I couldn't really think of a way to fit werewolves into like the world the same way, because like it took me a while to figure out how to make vampires work in a high as like a different race with their own country in a high fantasy setting. So, and I couldn't really do that with werewolves because without just making them shapeshifters, which I didn't want to do. I liked the idea too much of werewolves being like almost an inadvertent thing, where it's like where it's someone has like a almost a condition, and I didn't know how to really do that in a high fantasy setting, so I scrapped them and replaced them with like very high intelligent dire wolves. But I can't. They're just dire wolves. There's nothing to really elaborate on. The vampires are mostly what I like talking about with Glass Inferno, because I like these crazy steampunk vampires.
Yeah, it's always fun. Like it. I don't know how many episodes you've talked about them before, but like certainly on the world building ones, like I always just love hearing about them. They're so insane.
I have some other. I'm finally going to talk about other races though in today's episode. there are other races in this story other than vampires. I remember one time you asked me if I've just considered writing a story just about Titanians, and I've 100% considered it, but there are other things going on in this story, much to my chagrin.
Yeah. All right. So I guess to help round out the discussion on vampires and werewolves, and to close out the first hour of this very long discussion, Alex, talk about the Varun.
Yeah, so yeah, the vampires in my world are known as the Varun, which has fun linguistic stuff if you're familiar with my other races. The Varun on Katariana are actually, I can't go into the details of how they were created without massive spoilers, but I'm gonna do it anyway, so that's fine. But essentially, there's these other creatures, like races in my world, known as the Arun and the Drar, which are like weird eldritch space beings. The Arun are star eaters. They live off like starlight, and like consume like light is basically how they survive. And the Drar are like they have a symbiotic relationship with the Arun, where they kind of like have the leftovers of whatever the Arun don't finish. So basically, how vampires were created in my world is these two races, which are extremely like long-lived races, were bored one day, so they were like, hey, what happened if we combined our essences into what was essentially a human body? So they did that and accidentally created a vampire. And so the reason that the vampires need to drink blood is because they need to like consume like life essence, essentially. Like, you know, the Arun and the Drar need like the energy of stars.
Mm-hmm.
And so a human body isn't going to be able to consume a star, so they find their life energy in other living forms, basically. My Varun are long-lived. Only one of them has ever been made. The rest of them have been turned into vampires from that first one. And once they are turned, they no longer age. Like, their bodies are physically frozen in time. They also become, like, they have, like, heightened senses to an extent. and like they're very difficult to kill. So difficult to kill, in fact, that the Drar, upon realizing they created something kind of powerful and dangerous, were like, oh fuck, we should rectify that. So they had to create special weapons that are designed to kill vampires. And vampires are also, their other like ability that they have is they're more magical than normal people. Like they don't like have inherent magic, but they are able to like learn magic more easily than other people. And so a lot of them, upon being turned, perceive themselves as like higher beings than like normal people are, and which can, over long periods of time can be rather corrupting. I also have like a higher ranking version of vampires, which are called the Varbris, which are basically vampires that undergo like a magical ritual that involves a lot of like blood sacrifice and stuff, and that makes them like even more powerful. Like they have more magic, they're even harder to kill, that kind of stuff.
I have one really quick thing, Alex. Might I say, one of my favorite styles of creation story is two gods got bored, so let's make a baby. It's great. I love it. I've used it myself in Old World, but it's my favorite. It's my favorite. And then
I just think it's really funny. Like you have like these really powerful creatures, and you're just like, oh my god, how could something like this come into existence? And it's just like, two even more powerful people are like, let's see what happens.
Let's bang and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then this is an anecdote. And feel free to cut this completely out of the actual podcast. But I think we do need to have a linguistics and fantasy language meeting. Everyone, I know I've talked about this before, but I hear a lot of people using a lot of very interesting words, and I love talking language. Not today, obviously, but sometime in the future. My linguistics degree is tickling.
I'm down for that. I don't know if like anyone else has done this, like if Alex has reached out to you about it, but writing in our world is so fucking fun. Like writing the Varun especially, like, so I might have mentioned this before, but like her and I are working on some kind of like, we're working on like a short novella, I think, or maybe like a novelette of a group of Varun that I've been developing with Alex's help, and it's so fun. Like how I've said this before, but like how Alex world builds is actually incredible. It's genuinely surprising just how much detail she puts into her stuff.
I like my world building.
Yeah. I think with all of that being said, that should round out our first hour.
Yeah,
and I think
I don't have werewolves to talk about, so we can skip that for me.
Yeah, I don't really have any werewolves to talk about either. So I think given the fact that we are nearing 1 hour, and I think going sequentially might not be viable because we've joked about it before recording. They're like, oh, let's just do a thing. Let's do a 5-hour podcast. Let's see. So of the list that we have available, what is the next fantasy race you guys want to talk about?
Faeries.
Are we holding a vote?
Yeah, I was gonna say humans.
Just say what, like group majority. So I'm
Faeries.
down. I want to talk about fairies too. Because there's one depiction of fairies that I want to absolutely take a huge fucking shit on.
Is it Sarah J. Maas's?
No, surprisingly not. I'll save that for you. I want to take the fattest dump on the Disney Plus adaptation of Artemis Fowl's Fairies.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fuck those fucking bitches so much.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
Yeah. So, like, not to discredit the author of Artemis Fowl, obviously, I haven't read the books, but how Disney depicts fairies in this world is confusing. It's kind of like pseudo sci-fi, apparently, where they integrate like a lot of like different like sci-fi elements, such as like stopping time and whatever, like multifunctional guns that start off as like some kind of thing. And like, first of all, what the fuck? It's really hard to keep up with them, because sometimes it's very science fiction-esque, and then sometimes it's like kind of just weird. I think I can't really describe the in-between weird and science fiction, but like it those are the fairies in Disney Plus's adaptation of Artemis Fowl. And really, every single fairy aside from 2 or 3 feels absolutely disposable. Like it's hard to make a general viewing audience care about a whole society, right? But you kind of understand, like you can kind of get behind like Asgard from the Thor movies being like this very very beautiful place full of like ethereal people and whatever. But with Artemis Fowl, it's just fucking boring. Like it's a very generic sci-fi world. Like if I were to envision a sci-fi world, there's just nothing there really. And the fairies takes I don't know what the fuck they did, but the fairies in the world don't feel special. Like their armor looks interesting, but it doesn't really stand out in a world of like beautiful, like in a beautiful costume design nowadays. Like the intricate sci-fi elements are interesting, but does it really stand out compared to some other things, some other like huge sci-fi stories nowadays? Like it doesn't stand out, and that's what wastes not only the potential that Artemis Fowl had as a potential new series for many people to invest in, but it just wastes the concept of fairies, which is like these very like someone else could probably describe it better than I, but like fairies have always been a really interesting thing to discuss, and the fairies in Artemis Fowl from Disney is bullshit.
You seem very passionate about this, and I love that.
Fuck that movie.
I've never heard you swear so much.
He hasn't even read the book, which is the best part.
Yeah, right. So I'm looking at a little note discussion for the day, and I do love the inclusion of fairies and fae.
Fairies, fae, and nymphs.
Well, I have a problem with nymphs in the edition because nymphs are a Greek thing that doesn't technically relate to fairies, but I digress. I understand the correlation. But one thing that stands apart for fairies for me, now I've never watched Fowl, but you can speak to this if it's something it has, is the one thing that always struck me with good written fae is the existence of the other realm. Be it the Feywild, a fairy kingdom, some invisible place that they go to, some parallel dimension of some form or fashion. It's one of my favorite Fey tropes. And the fairies obviously fall hard into that great other race archetype. Mm-hmm. They're meant to be super alien in comparison to what would be your basic main character. And as such, it's very hard to make a Fey main character regardless, because you're human. It's hard to write not human per se. Mm-hmm. And one of the best examples of general Fae is, in my opinion, Patrick Rothfuss in the Kingkiller Chronicles series, which we still haven't gotten the 3rd book yet. Thanks, Patrick. Hurry the fuck up. And in that, the Fae do have another realm. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but he does a very good job of making things completely alien. Your main character is a human. He trips into the Fae realm to lose his virginity to a Fae goddess. That's about as much detail as I'll get into with that. But the way he portrays her, this is your typical fairy goddess. Men fall in love with her and then lose their minds when they can't be with her. And he describes her as not malicious. This isn't something evil she does. This is just something that happens to her. It's like a natural course of the world. This is how she was made in the Fae. And as such, it's an alien thought to her that what she's doing is evil because it's just what happens. And I think that's a very good way to make them alien. And another cool thing about his Fae realm is that there is no night and day. it comes from a different era of time in his world building, where night and day are directions, not times. When you walk further towards the night side, things get darker. The shadows grow and all that sort of deal. Whereas you walk further towards the day side, things get brighter. Plants begin to grow. And you also never see a sun, which is a very interesting concept for an entire realm based on, daylight as direction.
Mm-hmm. See, that's, I guess, what Artemis Fowl's depiction of fairies is missing. I can't speak on the books because I haven't read them. Gabe probably can because he has, but that was quite a while ago if I'm remembering correctly. But
it was, but I remember a lot about them.
Yeah, so I'll have him like elaborate for me. But in the movie depiction, having fairies set in like a sci-fi inspired society was interesting. It's just that there wasn't really anything special about it. Like,
it wasn't a matured concept. They didn't get plugged in properly. They were just sort of thrown on top, it seems like.
Yeah. It's kind of like the bare bones of an interesting concept that hasn't fully been realized. I think that's what irks me so much, because when I was hearing about Artemis Fowl and I was seeing some of the initial set designs and costume designs, I was like, ooh, this is interesting. Like all green armor, like I've said before, like sci-fi inspired themes. So, interchangeable weapons, the incorporation of like a literal time freeze and like flying ships and whatnot. Like it adds this unique element to the depiction, but it doesn't capitalize on it, is what pisses me off. It's just kind of there, and it isn't really given the specialty that it should be, because modern fairies, I haven't really seen that kind of depiction yet, but like modern science fiction fairies, fuck no.
I mean, for me, when I hear like science fiction and fairies, my brain goes to like Winx Club.
Oh my god. I remember that.
Yeah.
The original cartoon, not whatever the fuck Netflix is doing.
Thanks, Netflix, for Shadow and Bone, but fuck you for a lot of other things. Anyway, Gabe, if you want to elaborate on the fairies from the books, and then I'll touch base with Alex about another kind of fae that I really want to tear apart.
Yeah. Okay. So I've never seen the Artemis Fowl movie. I refuse to watch it on principle because the Artemis Fowl books they were like some of my favorite books as a kid growing up. They're fucking lit as hell. And I think under the right direction and not made by talentless hacks, they could be fucking awesome. If you gave that shit to Guillermo del Toro or something, you would have an awesome movie. Because here's the thing. The fairy world. All right, so you're telling me that in the movie it's like it's super it's like an interesting concept, but it's super underdeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, it's developed. It's developed like it's nobody's fucking business in the book. In the books, the fairy world is kind of insane, and I've been like looking up pictures of the movie to compare it to like the graphic novel, which is the way Artemis Fowl should be read, IMHO, because it looks amazing. But one of the things that's striking me is how the Fae they're just people. They're just dudes in the books. Like I'm gonna post like comparison pictures between the Fae City in the movie and the Fae City in the graphic novel, because one of the things that's like an important factor in Artemis Fowl in the books is that the Fae are fucked up looking. They're fucking weird looking. It's like one of the big antagonizing drives between Holly and Artemis. Which, side note, I've been informed that's not even a thing in the movie. They're buddies from square one.
They become buddies after the worst dialogue exchange I've ever seen.
Yeah, so
it's even worse than the whole fucking Martha thing.
The book is about Artemis kidnapping her for a heist. Like, they're not buddies in the book by any stretch of the imagination. They don't even become buddies, like, by as far as I know, like much later in the series. Not even first book. By the end of the first book, they're basically like they have just an antagonizing sort of respect, but also just like, you're a dick and I hate you on both ends. But yeah, what's striking me is that the world in Artemis Fowl is so interesting and vivid and colorful, and I love seeing it. I love reading all the sections about its culture, because there's so much like Holly is an interesting character in the books too, because her whole thing is that like Fae culture is this isn't really I don't know if this is something that has roots in fairy folklore. It probably doesn't. I can't imagine it does. I can't imagine Fae folklore has a lot of sexism in it, but there is a lot of like Holly having to deal with there's a lot of sexism in the Fae society, and the fact that like she's like the first fairy cop and then she gets kidnapped on the job on like day one, and that's a whole driving force of her character in the book. And every time I hear about this movie, I refuse to watch it even more, because there's so many interesting, rich aspects of the books, like from Artemis being turned from a piece of shit kid into a hero. That's still like damning to me. That's still like someone should be arrested for turning Artemis Fowl into a hero.
I'll say this: if you, Gabe, since you loved Holly's characterization and motivation and just character in general, do not watch the movie, because I promise everyone here, you will hear Gabe scream.
Oh yeah,
like
I can imagine.
You could be in your basement dead asleep, and you'll hear him. It is the fucking worst. Like, it pissed me off knowing that thing. It pissed me off knowing what we could have had with the book, like from book Holly, and the depiction of Holly in the show or in the movie just sucks.
That is essentially what I've heard. It has admittedly been a while, so like and the thing with Artemis Fowl is like there is an aspect of what you're talking about that kind of does also affect the books, where it's like they're fairies, but they're also like there's very little about their culture and like their world that speaks to like Fae mythology and like a lot of like Fae folklore and stuff. They're sort of like winged elves. That's sort of how the book treats them, and like with like a little bit of fairy references now and then, but they're more akin to elves, which from what I'm hearing is sort of in the movie, but in the movie it's like the watered down horrible version of that, where like none of the interesting stuff that the book does to make up for that is present, and they're basically just winged elves in sci-fi suits.
Yeah, it's so bad. Whatever nuance that the book had, I feel sorry for the book fans who like were screaming at their screens like, where is it? What the fuck? Like it must be
I will
hell
never
for
watch
them.
that movie.
Yeah. I guess while we're still touching between fairies and fae, Alex, let's talk about the fae from Sarah J. Maas. Which all right, Alex, you can start.
They're called fae, so you know what they're supposed to be. But like, okay, so basically the fae in Sarah J. Maas's books are really sexy humans that have really unclear and like poorly defined magic, and can also turn into an animal. And in some cases, apparently, your animal form can just be a human. So if that's you, sucks to suck, I guess. And that's about it. That's all I can think of. Like they're supposed to be like, they're very werewolfy, like, you know, like monster fucker werewolf kind of stories. That's what they are to me. It's just she wanted an excuse to have people that are like supernaturally sexy and also really into biting and like more animalistic, because I guess that's sexy or something. Like they don't really feel like fae or fairies, or like they're just they've always felt more like werewolves to me than they have like fae.
Yeah. I think that's just with, or that's not just with Throne of Glass, really. Like with Crescent City, her latest series. Like
I'm talking about the Court of Thorns and Roses book specifically.
Oh. Do you have any comment on the Throne of Glass Fae then? Because like
I mean, they're the same.
Yeah. That's
They're
pretty
not
much what I
any
was.
different.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was getting at too. Like Throne of Glass Fae, A Court of Thorns and Roses Fae, even Crescent City Fae, they're boring.
They're so boring.
They're
not.
boring and they're weird.
They're again, like we've talked about we've talked about like the mate system before, which like again is it's just Omegaverse but without the wolf part. That's what it is.
Yeah. Like on top of that, yeah, no, you're not wrong at all. Like there's also like, oh, it's mating system. There's only one mate there's only one mate, and it's apparently fucking difficult to find said mate. And conveniently,
everyone in the books finds their mate. Isn't that convenient?
It's even more convenient than your animal form apparently being a fucking person.
I'm still not over that. I still think that's the funniest thing ever.
Hey, what if like your mate's like a goat and you're the human?
You know what? It'll be written into the book.
I was gonna say that's just like the only logical conclusion.
Yeah, just by the laws of Sarah J. Maas's writing, there's a mate for every character.
Someone's gonna be like a rat fan, someone's gonna be a gorilla fan. They're just the mates. It's like, all right, you guys gotta get it on.
Again, their Fae form is just a sexy human.
Oh, okay. I get it. Get your rat form out of here. Go back to being a sexy human.
There's
if we want to talk about the main character of the Throne of Glass series, Aelin, her Fae form is the sexier version of her animal form, which is a human, and then her mate can turn into like a falcon. Like,
she's just gonna bang a falcon.
I don't know.
For 3 hours on the beach.
It's
That's fucking hilarious. I love this writer.
Apparently, Fae also have very high stamina, which is very convenient. But yeah,
isn't
just
that nice. They're designed for fucking.
Yeah, like that's pretty much what it is. Like everything that Alex has said, like that's really the defining thing that makes Sarah J. Maas's Fae her Fae. Like they're
sexy.
They're outrageously hot, and that's about it. Like Wendelin, which is like the Fae realm, feels hollow for me, and granted, like it's probably been like a long ass time since I've read the book, but when I first read Wendelin, like you start off Heir of Fire in like the more common area of Wendelin, which is just like supposed to, in my mind, I resembled like an Italian city kind of, with how everything looked and how everything was like structured and whatnot. But when we got to Wendelin and it was like this very gorgeous like castle and shit, I don't know. I didn't sense anything.
See, when I picture Wendelin, I picture like a little like stone building where the kitchen is, and then there's like a hill with a tree on it, and that's where Aelin and Rowan fight each other. That's all I can see in my head when I picture Wendelin. It's just this like grassy hill with a tree on it and a stone building in the background.
Yeah, like when it comes to what Tyler was saying earlier and how with Fae, one of the main things that makes Fae so interesting to write is the alternate worlds. Basically, it doesn't feel like that in Sarah J. Maas's work. Like personally between A Court of Thorns and Roses, Throne of Glass, Crescent City, like I don't know, just there isn't it's not there for me.
Well, also when you think about like the way like the Fae realm as it were in A Court of Thorns and Roses, like you have the different, what are they called?
Different courts?
The different courts, yeah. There's like the 7 different courts north of the wall. But like the only real differences I felt between like the human realm and the Fae realm north of the wall was that the Fae are richer and they have bigger houses.
And they made
But
for
otherwise,
fucking.
and yeah,
Yeah.
that too. There's a-
they got everything set up there. Fuck.
Velvet
There's
Rap
a
Steel.
lot
I
of sex
fucking
in
hate
these
it
books.
here.
There's a lot of sex in these books.
Yeah. Which I don't think is critical for stories. Just and somehow it's
Before
in
we get
every
off
single
the topic
fucking
of
book.
Fae, I want to talk about the history of the Fae and how this is
Can I-
just like
I was gonna say before
What?
Marie-Soleil goes off.
it angering
can I say,
you?
Can we? I was gonna say, can we go back to the old days of Fae before Marie-Soleil can correct me on this? Of like, they used to lure kids to like forests and they just get fucking slaughtered. Like, weren't they evil creatures?
exactly it. Yes.
I
So
like
the
that
Fae,
shit.
the Fae aren't exactly evil per se, but they just don't care about humans. And sometimes humans are amusing to them,
I love
but
all
most
that
of the
shit.
times they don't want anything to do with us.
They were like mischievous and shit. And like, I remember like old fairy tales that they'll lure kids into the forest to get lost, and obviously the kid's gonna die because he's lost in the forest. Man, if we go back to that'd be sick. And I like the Artemis Fowl one. That what's it called? Okay, like here's my beef. I like Faes to look more like human because if they're going to be mischievous and tricking other humans, they need to look human. That's the way to lure other humans to them.
No, that's what glamours are for.
Oh
they
my
have
God.
magic.
How in the fuck?
No.
How
Oh,
in
yeah,
the
good
hell,
point.
guys? How in the hell did we get from forest creatures that minded their own business to only sex?
Yeah, what happened?
Very famous.
It's
Monster fuckers.
it's
The
monster fuckers that are
unyielding
scared to
weight
admit
of
about
Sarah J.
being.
Maas.
No, it's
Yeah.
monster fuckers that are scared to admit they're monster fuckers.
Scared.
Just call yourself a furry. It's okay. I've had
like
to
a
come to
web
terms
of
with that.
excuse. Fuck.
Speaking of
Look, no judgment. If you're into that, you're into that. Just embrace it and don't try to disguise it.
yeah, I think while we're
I've been
sorry.
reading about Faes since I was like 12 years old and everything, starting with the Spiderwork Chronicles and going all the way to like,
Oh my god, I forgot about that series.
yeah, to the Hellboy. You want a good idea of what the Fae look like? In the second Hellboy movie, the Goblin Market. That's
Oh,
what
God.
the Fae look like.
Remember that?
Oh
That was
God bless.
sick. Man, Hellboy.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you don't believe that the Fae are real, you can chalk them up as stories that parents told their children so that the children would behave, and stories that parents were able to tell each other about why that child that wasn't quite right in the head disappeared. A changeling child was probably a neurodivergent child.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So the myth of it is that if you kidnap your child or replace it with one of their own, so that child would be different. It wouldn't be normal. It'd be more violent or more just not good with people because it's not supposed to be with people. It's Fae, right? And so there's all these stories of people leaving these changeling children in the woods, or getting rid of their changeling children. Just as a reason why, like, they're getting rid of their not normal child.
That's
The
fucked
Fae
up.
Oh my
aren't
God.
good.
That
Don't
is
fuck
fucked
the
up.
Fae.
But yeah, the whole sexy, kinky Fae, or like the family-friendly Fae that helps the hero go through the forest. It's cool, but yeah, I like the old mischievous ones.
And then this is why I think we do need to draw a distinction between Fae and Fairies, because I think at least in like modern society they have very different connotations. Like when I hear fairy, I think like Tinkerbell, but when
Yeah.
I hear Fae, I think, like changelings and that kind, like the older stories.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
So,
I'm a fan of both personally.
Yeah.
If I may talk distinctions, the modern depiction we're using for the term fairy should actually probably be better noted as a pixie. And
That
then
is
the
fair.
Oh,
Fair.
pixies! Forgot about that word.
Yeah, and then the fae and fairies would still be our mischievous little fuckers, which is my preference as well.
Yeah.
You
you need
so
you
a
need
segue.
you need a few little shits in your story.
a few little shits besides the author, of course.
It would also be a great horror movie, honestly.
There's a few.
Kids just disappearing, and it turns out to be there's just a East or something. That'd be a good horn.
I'd like to
Priests
state.
wouldn't do shit. Fairies don't believe in God.
That's well. How would you get rid of them then? I just want like a county sheriff with a shotgun trying to shoot a fairy out of the sky.
I'd like to
There's
state.
like fairy lore about protecting yourself from fairies. You know.
Yeah,
things
that
like
depends on the fae, where they're from, what you believe in, what, like, it all depends on what type of fae it is, because all faes are different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just as a closing thing, or sorry, Tyler, go ahead. I'll save my thing for
I
after.
was wondering if anyone's written any fun fae, because we've talked a lot about the differences in what we prefer and not. I know Marie-Soleil has a very fun story segment she was working on, and I have my own interesting type. But has anyone else tried to include the fair folk?
I write about fairies all the time, all different kinds.
I unfortunately do not have fae or
Sexy one.
fairies.
I was definitely a fairy kid growing up. I read like all the books about fairies. Big fan.
My face story involves them fucking and a falcon on a beach. No, I'm just kidding.
Hope you don't get copyrighted for that one or accused of plagiarism.
Yo, let's fucking try.
I mean, she's a pretty successful author
Yeah.
Shockingly enough.
for some reason. Ouch.
I'd like to state for the record, Sarah J. Maas, if you ever get your ears on this, I really enjoy your work. No one else really does, but I do. I can
Don't lie.
I can make jokes.
Don't just
Okay,
lie.
I can make jokes. I can make jokes. My jokes are jokes. I can't speak for everyone else, but I am joking. Anyway,
Let's just say, I never heard of that before. Just
Okay.
a human fucking a falcon in the beach. So I'll give her creativity
it
points.
really sticks with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's not a falcon when they have sex, just for the record.
I keep forgetting. I just still imagine him as a falcon. I forget he can switch back.
He can turn into a falcon. He is not a falcon throughout most of the story.
You can turn into a falcon. Aren't you always a falcon on some level?
Why would you want to be a person? Yeah, just be a falcon. You can fly. You're a
Yeah, you can
apex
just fly and
predator.
vibe.
I
You
guess
can
that's
fly, you
another.
can fuck
That's
hot girls on
another.
the beach.
I guess
Yeah.
that's another mark against Sarah J. Maas.
You would need to fuck Aelin though, so that's kind of a Okay. Tyler, Marie-Soleil, your fae and fairies, please.
Mine is quicker, so I'll go through mine. Once again, I'm extrapolating into a science fantasy setting, and as such, my ideas of the Fae having their own kingdom, their own secret world, being invisible to the eyes of humans, just fell naturally into the realm of artificial intelligence and a greater, like, net style. As such, the Fae in my setting are rampant free AIs that live entirely within the web. They trick people through ads and clickbaits to try and enter their personal information and seek whatever goals they have. They're very mischievous. Their motives are entirely alien to humans, probably some long forgotten programming that's meshed and algorithmed out into some strange want of sentience. And yeah, that's my sci-fi fae for you.
That's actually like a really perfect
Yeah,
place for them, because then you
It
think
fit
about
really
yeah, that's really cool.
they're pieces of shit, so check on that.
Well, and that's just it. I do have the idea of the Seelie and Unseelie Fae going as well. Those AI that are still service AI that want to help humanity as masters, and those that don't.
Mm-hmm. That's really
That's my
cool.
Fae.
Yeah, that's really cool. Marie-Soleil, how about you? Your fae fairies.
So, my fae kind of fit into like you were. I think Alex mentioned the court system that a lot of people talk about with the fae. Kind of fits into that. So, in the court system, from my research that I have done, there's the summer court, there's the winter court, which is all often mixed in with the unseelie court and the summer with the seelie court. So a lot of people think seelie means good fae, unseelie means evil fae. However, that is not true. Unseelie fae are the ones that actually do you harm. Seelie fae are the ones that want to have fun with you, and if you get hurt, they don't really care in the end. So the story that I have written out, some of you have read it in the creative writing class we took. It takes place in a university town that is home to the fae. The founders of said town city have made a deal with them long ago. It's out of known memory long ago. This town has been there for a while. That the fae can have their fun as long as the people follow their rules, they will be untouched. And so they have a bunch of university students that come through here, and a lot of them go missing because they don't know the rules that the locals do. And my main character is trying to figure out what happened to her sister who went missing in this town, where she meets these fae, who are all part of some court, most of them the summer and the unseelie court I chose. And they're the ones that you have to be careful with your word choice around them, because if you say, even so much as say like, thank you, you are admitting that you owe them. They've done something for you, now you owe them. And what you owe is up for them to pick. And I'm following like all of the rules that I found out there. You don't use your name because your name is your being, your true is who you are. So by giving them your name, you're giving them control over yourself. And yeah, they're devilishly charming and handsome, beautiful in all ways, except there's something about them that's not normal. They're too beautiful, too handsome. There's just something about them that isn't right.
Ooh. That's really cool. I don't think I was there for that, but if anyone else can remember, I'd like to hear how that went.
I do remember it. Yeah.
I've done a critique of this story as well, yeah.
I don't remember like all the details, but
That's
I remember
cool.
like
Can I read it?
Your descriptions of like the fae were really fun.
I'll post it either tonight or tomorrow.
Whenever is fine. That's actually really interesting. Yeah, it opens like a lot of potential for, I think, characterization, because no matter which fae you choose, how they kind of react to said system. That's so cool.
Oh, and one of the characters that she does mention is it kind of takes on the grandfather mentor archetype, is done super well with being like an eerie fair folk, but also trying to be like not necessarily good, but good passing per se.
Yeah, I kind of brought in both elements of the Fae courts and then the not hellhounds. They essentially are what created hellhounds. So like, they're not exactly Fae, but they're related. And it's a little too complicated to get involved in a podcast where we still have a lot of other things to talk about.
I guess in that case, as a kind of closing for the fairies and fae, research like Marie-Soleil did, instead of just making them fuck every other living thing.
Oh, also, I remembered a couple of things that will protect you from the fae. In general, salt, iron, running water will keep you safe from the fae.
Yeah.
Running water? Like you have to be standing in it?
They can't cross it.
Oh, that's sick. Okay, that makes sense.
If I
Just something you also see in vampire lore sometimes.
It's because humanity has always feared the uncanny valley, and we relate all our myths to the same general things, praying that it will protect us.
I'm sorry, this is a little off tangent, but it's something I just remembered. There is one thing that's in common with the Fae and with vampires and old lore is counting. They're obsessed with counting. So the whole spill salt in front of a Fae and they can't cross it is not so much the salt, it's the fact that they will count the individual grains. Vampires will do this too. Do you remember Sesame Street, the count?
I was about to say.
One.
Yep.
Fuck, that's funny.
Yeah. All right. I think that was fairies and fae. What do we want to talk about next? Again, group majority. It's
I heard a call for humans.
I was
last
gonna
time
say
it was
I'll vote
and
humans again, but
Okay.
I'll let majority decide.
I'm down to talk about humans.
Oh
All right, well,
shit!
I guess it's the majority.
All right.
All right, humans. Yeah.
Fuck you, humanity.
Fuck. I like humans,
yeah,
honestly.
humanity.
I don't know why. As I got older, because I used to think they were the most boring race in fantasy, but I kind of grew with them. Fucking man, my humans. Because there's so many ways you could write them up. In Elder Scrolls, you have them as like different races from different kind of parts of the world. Like the Red Guards are the Arabic, the Nords are the Swedish, and that was kind of cool. And then in Game of Thrones, they did it where it's like very medieval hierarchy. You know, you got the royal families of each, and I thought that was sick too. What else was there? I'm trying to think. Like, you know, humans are just basically, you kind of have to like look like how we look at humans, but like the problem is you still got to spice it up a bit, that it's not too on the nose. You know what I mean? You got to really give them their own sense of like culture, laws, morality, names. Like, you literally have to create their civilization. And you can do the same things for elves and orcs and shit like that. That's what fantasy's about. The only thing I really changed up with my humans that I feel like the fantasy writing world has not really touched on is the idea of civilization. So I wrote up one fantasy a while ago. It was all, they're basically, the entire thing is humans. I try to basically teach kids real world events or scenarios using humans. So when I try to explain the idea of like like, I don't want to say colonization, but sort of the idea of how do humans colonize other humans, was I thought of it as like, you know, you got the knights civilization and they have like swords and maces and all that stuff. And I sort of thought of it as, respectfully, as like the barbarian tribe, as more of the nomadic nature kind of. That's how I looked at it. Where I was like, what if there was just each human had their own civilization with their own access to a certain amount of technology, and they each work differently, and those civilizations clash, and each one have their own benefits and buffs. I like that. Every human in every fantasy would have the same level of technology or society, that they never really differentiate between the two. Because right now you can still see Amazon tribes in like the rainforest. They're still human. You know what I mean? Like, it's some parts of the world is still left not as developed as us, and they're literally living in another world, but on the same planet, which I thought was always a cool idea that fantasy hasn't really touched upon yet.
Right.
I mean, fantasy does touch on those things. It just tends to use fantasy races to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Not always well, but
Yeah.
that's like a focus of a lot of fantasy stories is, look, colonization, humans take over the elves or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. But for me, the big thing I wanted to go on was like technology. Because for me, the barbarians, it was basically the knights needed more land. So they went into the unexplored area. And from there, they found like they're basically barbarians, just pretend they're barbarians. So I was like, well, for the barbarians, they would use bones and certain rocks that they've sharpened up to be as like rough blades. And I was like, hey, well, it's their land. So let's say they're bigger in number and they can do guerrilla warfare better than the knights. Because someone in a suit of armor can't move as fast. Well, at the same time, I was like, well, what if the knights had crossbows and shit like that? So that's where I was trying to kind of get into. The technology differences would be something that would be kind of cool.
It would be, yeah. So I think to add on to that, Charbel, and hopefully you like hearing the sounds of this. I've elaborated I think in a previous episode of the podcast relating to our magic systems, how the humans in my world, the Illyrians, are in like the time world, or the world that Xeno is set in currently is focused primarily in between this crossroads of fantasy and science fiction. The magic system plays a part in essentially 5 different areas of magic, or 5 different schools of magic: fire, water, air, earth, and lightning. In between each of them, they have, in between these core tenets, they can fuse into different variations. the fuse between fire and lightning is premi, which is combustion basically, and combustion has been helped to create guns in the world, but it's not the kind of gun that incorporates powder and bullets. It's a kind of gun that incorporates batteries for the magazine, and the weapon itself like it's charged by these batteries that gives your weapon a certain number of shots before the battery is completely drained, and then you toss it out and you replace it for a new battery. So you're basically putting in a new magazine for a gun. However, you're just giving, like, through these batteries, you're just giving it's shit, I lost my train of thought. But yeah. That's what that is.
That makes sense. I haven't written anything. It's all just been planning, but I've had the idea of magic being the leveler between these different civilizations and technologies. One of it was, so the barbarians they call them shamans. I'm just using this as a footholder name, where it's like, it's the barbarians who can use magic. They're called shamans. And I was like, the knights will have their own versions. I call them paladins, as just all that shit. But it's like, even though humans, like I said in the chat, that they are the most basic bitch race and fantasy, you could definitely go a long way with them.
Yeah.
And obviously how they interact with other races and shit like that.
Mm-hmm. Like humans, I think in fantasy have always played one of two interesting roles that I will then kind of elaborate in further ones. But I think, yeah, what you're saying, humans give a lot of free reign when you're exploring or when you're writing fantasy, because the thing is, when you're writing out elves, or when you're writing out orcs, or when you're writing out whichever else kind of fantasy, there are bigger influences behind you that have kind of set some kind of precedent for these things. Like when we were talking about vampires, we were like a lot of the more famous aspects of vampires were from Dracula and from early vampires like that. Humans have been around and have existed in real life, surprisingly. So it's up.
What?
It's
You
pretty
mean
much
real?
yeah. It's
would never
amazing,
have
right?
Really?
Had no idea.
Yeah. So that kind of gives us free reign to write out humans however we personally want to. When it comes to other races, though, like elves, for example, there's always those lingering kind of tenets that Tolkien did with his elves that kind of seep into your writing no matter what, right? Like you could be relying on this other writer for their depiction of elves, but somehow that still stretches back to Tolkien, because he is the one that made these characteristics so defining, I guess, in a way. And someone can correct me if possible, but like
I'm pretty sure he took a lot of his depictions from like Norse mythology and stuff too, though.
Yeah,
and it stretches back even further.
I guess I must be looking at it from like. Sorry, Charbel, go ahead.
No, but like it is good to kind of look back and see where your influences, how they got their influences. I get what you mean. A lot of the elves have that same setup. The elf race that really impressed me was the Scoia'tael from Witchers, because they were like a terrorist group. I thought they're literally just guerrilla warfare fighters trying to make their own kingdom. And I thought that whole system, instead of normally elves are big prestigious race that dominate the world, having them as just this little guerrilla warfare group, I thought was sick. It's been a while since I played the game, so correct me, but I thought they were pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have minor comments here. We're talking about humans as having these varied cultures, and that's how we can make them unique per se. So I'm going to touch. We're talking about elves and humans in an almost direct correlation sense, and I like the fact that we're doing that. So I'm going to stick with it.
Okay.
And we mentioned Tolkien again, and I'm a Tolkien simp, just a bit.
Aren't we
The one
all?
thing that everyone always forgets about Tolkien is his elves were not a homogenous culture. And this is something that so much fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons included, even though that's what I play so much of, falls into, is each race is itself a homogenous culture, when this is very incorrect. If humanity can have 700 different cultures spread out across one planet, why can't elves, dwarves, and everything else? And Tolkien actually had this. Tolkien had 3 or 4 different separate countries and cultures of elves, which was very impressive. He also had 3 or 4 different countries and cultures of humans as well. And so we're talking about how humans' diversity is kind of their strength and kind of why we bring them up. When we can use that in any template really and truthfully, and I often find it very flat if someone uses a fantasy race just as a homogenous placeholder per se.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Right, yeah.
like, I feel like if you have elves and they're just, elves and, they live in trees and they shoot things with a bow and arrow and that's all you have, that's like, where's your world building?
Yeah.
Like, that's not, you can, I agree that you always need to put more effort into your races.
You can also,
yeah.
You could also go the other way, because if you look at orcs, a lot of them have been what's the word? Like
Homogenized.
Yeah. So you could also have it that like orcs are dumb. This orc is the strongest. He's the leader, and they all follow him. You know what I mean? You can go the other way with them, or goblins could have the same sort of system.
I think that's bad writing personally.
Yeah.
Yeah. That could be the thing, because I like it.
Especially because a lot of times orcs and goblins are based on non-white races. So that can lead to like racism problems too.
Well, I never thought of that when I saw an orc. I was like, that's an orc. That's just
You don't really think of these things, especially when you're still fairly young, but once you do start kind of looking past the undertones, it's like
every cultures have nuance no matter what race they are, and that applies to fantasy races too.
Right.
And this is an interesting word on Tolkien and lots of other fantasy, is misappropriating a culture as evil is a very problematic thing in general, because as we talked about in Villains episode, no one really wants to be evil. No one designs a culture to be evil. A group of people usually isn't inherently evil. They think they're doing right. And so, yes, we have to have a big bad evil guy, but to make a big bad evil race is a little
Yeah.
You can also like change it up, like those people who are writing with those racist undertones, they're not going to hide it. They're going to be very obvious about it. You know what I mean?
Lovecraft.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's like the ones who actually put the effort into designing their race and fantasy to their own world. You wouldn't see it's all like the ones who intentionally do it or unintentionally do it. They just do it subconsciously. It'll be so obvious that you'll be able to pick it out. You know what I mean?
If I we've talked a little bit about someone else's humans already, and this sort of tangentially relates to my own. One of the things that I've always had trouble with is actually including fantasy races, period, and it's because of that cultural divergence. To write 4 different cultures for 3 different races that have to interact and whatnot is very fun, yes, and I do still love reading it. But in writing personally, I find humans are interesting enough in a lot of times. And in my dark fantasy days, humans were the only race. And they had varied cultures and varied myths between them that I did base off of realized human cultures around the world. But in my current project, once again, I've gone with the kind of there's only humans. Besides artificial intelligences and one other fantasy thing that I decided to include, there's 99.9% humans, but I'm still using fantasy tropes. As we discussed with vampires, my vampires are really just human. My elves are really just humans with a different moniker and different culture. My dwarves are humans with a different culture. In the writing, I'm never going to call them by these names, but I've used humans to fit into those archetypes I discussed before. And as opposed to changing it to a fantasy race to make it other and interesting, I am simply making it a human culture because we have so many. And I think it's a problem people think when people think humans are boring. when people don't want to play humans in D&D or something like that, because we are the most interesting species we've ever met, besides perhaps jellyfish.
Fair enough.
I also kind of want to like jump off this and talk about another reason I think humans work in fantasy settings that have non-human races as well, which kind of goes into like ideas of projection, and like we were talking about with earlier with the Fae and the vampires and the werewolves is there's always been this like need for humans to protect ourselves from others and the unknown. And like a lot of times you can argue humans are the basic race, they don't have any special abilities or anything, and that's why they're boring. But I think in a lot of ways having an ordinary person like persevering and like surviving and accomplishing things in a world full of beings that are arguably stronger and more powerful than humans are, like there's something comforting about that as humans as well.
It's an endearing message. It's pretty timeless.
Yeah. It's like, because we always have to go back to Tolkien. In Tolkien you have the hobbits, for example, who are this they're like these simple little folk that everyone always underestimates, and they manage to save the world essentially. And like I think humans kind of fill that role in a lot of other stories. And as humans ourselves, there's something about that we're like, yeah, humans can
are just
achieve
a human
stuff.
fan insert canon.
Sure, yeah, let's go with that.
No, straight up true though.
I know.
Why they were written the way they were. Even humans in Tolkien aren't necessarily humans, because we have the race of kings that Aragorn is from, who lives for fucking ever and is really good at fucking everything, who are basically just another form of elf. So yes, hobbits are kind of the layman's of Middle Earth.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's another reason that humans work in fantasy settings, even when there's not like or even when there are other races that might be considered cooler or more fun.
Fair enough, yeah. It's the human spirit that drives a lot of these stories. That's the right wording for it.
And see, allow me to interject. What about the elven spirit? Are you specifically just focusing on one race there? Can't every race have spirit? And this is the problem I ran into, and why I don't often include actual fantasy races, is because I can only write a human perspective 99% of the time. So to think that another sentient race is not going to have the same sentience, motivations, and drives is nigh on impossible. I've got a monkey brain. I'm sorry, I can't do much else.
Fair enough. And I mean to elaborate, when I say human spirit, like, again, like a lot of people or a lot of fantasy readers, they kind of do tend to relate more to said humans. Like you can have a lot of cool fantasy races here and there, but ultimately people just love writing humans because it's pretty much what you said, Tyler. Like you only know your human perspective, and being able to relate to anyone that looks like you is just, I guess, step one in help in I guess vibing with the story. That's probably not the right word that I'm trying to think, but like it's the one that helps you. It's the one that helps you. It's the one that immerses you better into the story.
Well, but I can still like, sympathize if like an elf lost a loved one.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Of course.
Like,
yeah.
You can bring human traits and emotions into if you written it well. I was kind of thought of it as this like, I don't want to say it's easy. I don't want to say that it's easy to create human civilization in fantasy. You can't just like, I kind of don't like it when it's too on the nose, where they just literally pick apart from history and then just throw it on to a fantasy setting like Game of Thrones. You really should spice it up enough that it's unique on its own, that it has no semblance of any reference or whatever.
Yeah. And I think despite humans being a pretty baseline fantasy race, there's still so much potential that you can take it, right? Like you can give them powers, you can give them amazing fighting abilities. You can make them technically proficient. There are a lot of things that, for me personally, like writing humans is always very fun, despite maybe earlier claims that I may or may not have said that like humans are pretty boring. Like it's not a bad kind of boring, nor is it like very negative either. It's more or less just like there's a lot of ways, like there's a lot of creative ways that you can take humanity in, especially if it's fantasy with different races, which is what I was trying to touch on earlier. Like fantasy or humans in a fantasy race, like in a racially diverse fantasy setting, so like different races and whatnot, like that's one thing. But humans within its own fantasy world, where it's a lot of humans and very few fantasy races, or like fantasy races based more or less off of humanity itself, that's also really interesting.
Yeah, and that depends on, I think a lot of the dark fantasy goes into more humans, less about like fantasy races, because sometimes they try to go into like, here's the dark part of humanity in a medieval setting or in a fantasy setting, throw a little bit of magic in there and shit like that, you know?
Tyler, would you want to elaborate since you've dabbled in dark fantasy?
Yeah. So, one of the straight up tropes of dark fantasy is the fact that it's human centric, actually. You see it in Game of Thrones. Mostly humans are the sentient race. Yeah, you've got the children of the forest and a teeny bit of giants in there, but humans are the dominant. Black Company by Glenn Cook. Amazing series. Do not read it if you are at all weak of heart or stomach. Dear God, don't. It's a hell of a trip. Human centric, almost entirely. Humans fill every necessary role. Even the big bad evil who has gained near immortality through magic was once human. My own writing, when you try to fit any high fantasy race into a dark fantasy setting, it becomes hard to do because there's a certain passage you have to do with high fantasy of these races can coexist. Whereas in dark fantasy, you don't have to do that. And more often than not, if we haven't reached an age of enlightenment, chances are we're not going to live at peace. And one side is definitely working to destroy the other, which is, and we've touched on this, why I quite like The Witcher. I'm not going to say The Witcher is dark fantasy. It's pretty close, though.
Mm-hmm. I do like endings where it's like nobody wins. They all just get slaughtered. And you could do that with other... Like, it is better in the terms of dark fantasy when you're going to want to get real morbid. Because it's up to you. If you want to do a little discussion on how evil humans are to each other, you can add more humans. Or if you just want to do a more darker, crueler world, kind of, I was thinking like Berserk, you can add demons and add... no, there's demons in Berserk, but in another setting, you can add like elves who are just like absolute maniacs and stuff like that, you know?
Right.
Yeah, and once again, it seems to be... I haven't read Berserk, but even in The Witcher, again... The trope is that humans are the most populous, that we spread like rabbits and wildfire over all the other races. And that's dark. That's dark to think about, that we need space, so we take up the land. We take it from the others, which is a big dark fantasy trope. And The Witcher touches on it quite a bit. Again, I won't necessarily say The Witcher is dark fantasy. It's close, but Andrzej Sapkowski, does a very good job of fully integrating each of the races together in his tapestry. He does a very good job of it and showing how, hey, guess what? These elves have committed atrocities, but they committed them because the humans are leading pogroms against them. The dwarves have retreated into their mountains because they're fucking safe there. The few that go out are kind of weirdly exiled and have to live under human boot.
Right.
Yeah, I should really read the books I've heard, because the game was a lot of that shit. I was like it's been a while since I beat the game, but I have another race if you want to move on, if you want to keep talking dark. But
we'll touch on books for the Andrzej Sapkowski. The first two books are short story anthologies. They're very good, not too dark. Then the actual novels are basically a big ass walking simulator where he talks a lot about political boundaries and stuff like that. Still a very good read, but it's not monster hunting. If you've played the games and are expecting that, you're not going to get it.
I've heard.
And then we can segue.
Yeah. Like, I've always liked, like, in terms of fantasy, and I've been kind of getting up on Warhammer recently, and same with Lord of the Rings, you can get into it. I've always liked the idea of demons as being this ultimate evil, that it doesn't matter what race you are, what fantasy you are. I've always liked the idea of this just ultimate supernatural evil force. It could be cosmic, because in World of Warcraft, they have the Burning Legion, which is just literally an endless army of demons that just from outer space or from Outland. I've always liked that in demons, because that's why I never, like, those were always like, those are the final bad guys. In Game of Thrones, they had the White Walkers as the supernatural force, where it's like all these races or all these humans or whatever are fighting over politics and conquest, that the big evil that's hiding in the shadows. I've always liked that nobody's paying attention to it because they're too busy bickering with their politics and conquest.
Right, yeah. I think as we have now segued into demons and subsequently angels, I think there's just always been something inherently fascinating about a pre-established and pretty dominant evil and a dominant good in angels, or in demons and angels respectively. Like growing up within, to steer away from fantasy for just a second, growing up within the church, we've been told, or growing up in the Catholic Church, it's like demons have always been a pretty loose definition, like more or less just don't fuck with demons, they'll mess up your life completely. But when you pick apart a lot of the, I guess, some of the concepts behind some of the demons in the Bible and in Christian myth, I think it is hella fascinating. Like the 7 deadly sins, for example, have been written as have been personified in numerous adaptations in fantasy before, and I love almost every single depiction of it.
I love 7 deadly sin stories.
Yeah, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, is always a really interesting concept to tap into, and one of my underrated favorite game franchises, Darksiders, does that fairly well. Actually exploring hell itself too, in, again, not necessarily high fantasy, but when reading through Inferno by Dante Alighieri and how hell works,
bring this up.
Yeah, and how hell works, and how demons correspond and live within this like visceral, disgusting hellscape. It's so cool. Like, it is absolutely fascinating, like actually exploring this as a writer, because like I think with angels and demons, it is very much, like, for me at least, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but for me at least, like, it is a template to how you personify, or to how you portray good and evil, and really explore that to its fullest extent, or skew the differences. So you have fallen angels, avenged demons. There's so much creative potential with these two. It's kind of like these two are very interlinked compared to, like, in relation to werewolves and vampires. However, vampires and werewolves, that is something that we in the beginning weren't really sure of. Everyone is familiar with the battle between angels and demons.
I have, as always, things to say. Funny that you were raised in the Catholic Church there. As a bona fide Satanist and minor demonologist, I have some very interesting things to say about angels and demons. One being, yes, a lot of the old works are very wonderful templates to use. Paradise Lost, Dante's Inferno, actually the entire Divine Comedy, because Dante also has Purgatorio, which is purgatory, and Paradiso, which is heaven. And his descriptions of all three are extremely illuminating and very, Very interesting. If you're looking for very interesting hellscapes, by the way, I do have a recommendation for a trilogy. It is called the Bobby Dollar series. I forget who it's by. Takes perspective of an angel. It's basically a noir detective novel that goes through hell. Very interesting. Very well done. And I like to talk about demons quite a bit because in humanity's past, they weren't always this great evil force. We're talking very old Christian mythology here, talking about a one King Solomon who used to summon demons, which is why we have a grimoire named the Greater Key of Solomon, which lists a whole bunch of demonic lords and how to properly summon them, to build his great tower. And he's been vilified in modern Christianity, but back in the day, demon summoning itself was a very Christian practice, binding this creature to your will to teach you things. Because demons didn't always used to be fire and brimstone. They used to be knowledge. They used to teach people art. They used to teach people sexuality. And all these things actually stem from old pagan rituals. But if we're talking specifically Christian mythology, the fact that they've become evil is only a modern twist. They used to be tools.
Well,
Ooh, that's interesting.
what's it called? It also depends on what you want to go with. Because, like, because if you want to go off with the Bible, I've always liked the idea of like the tempter and all that shit. You know, I don't know if you guys know the story, but like Jesus gets tempted by the devil when he's out on the desert 40 days. I've always liked that because you could have that in multiple characters, or the one character who's trying to tempt the hero to do something evil that goes against the hero's character. All that shit has always been there. There's always been the representation of the snake, Adam and Eve, in the Bible.
Well,
And all that shit. So you can just totally there's if that's more of like an interpersonal relationship in a fantasy, if you want to go. If you want to go like obviously the large scale, which is the infinite, the Burning Legion, the Chaos Legion from Warhammer. There's just this supernatural cosmic army of demons from out of nowhere. They're just there.
Right.
I prefer Adam's first wife, Lilith, if I'm honest. She was more of a bad bitch.
she's so cool.
She's so cool.
I also just love the name Lilith, but I also like the name Eve. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
Lilith was the OG.
Lilith was the OG, actually.
The OG bad bitch.
Yeah. So
Eve's a poser.
So Charbel was touching on demons from Berserk, which I wasn't familiar with, but I do know one other person who is very familiar with it. Gabe, if you want to touch on the demons in Berserk.
Don't talk about the horse one.
I will not. I'm mostly going to talk about the God Hand, because the God Hand and Berserk are fucking terrifying. The Eclipse in Berserk lasts like only a handful of chapters. So okay, for those who haven't read Berserk, Berserk is like, it's like for most of Berserk, I mean not for most of Berserk, but like for the first half of Berserk, excluding the Black Swordsman arc, which takes place after the Eclipse. The Golden Age arc is like mostly your pretty standard like medieval fare. It's like there's swords, there's wars, there's mercenaries, some bad shit happens. I'm not talking shit about Golden Age by any stretch. The Golden Age is as far as I'm concerned, it's a masterpiece of fantasy writing. But it's like there's nothing that's like especially crazy about the Golden Age. There is like fantasy elements, but it's not. But then the eclipse happens. Griffith, the villain of Berserk, at which he becomes the villain during the Eclipse. He's a good guy before then. He summons the God Hand. He summons the Eclipse. Whether or not he intended to do this or if it was inadvertent is unclear. But he does join the God Hand willingly and sacrifices the Band of the Hawk and basically fucks the entire planet to create Falconia, which is like his idea of a paradise. But basically, yeah, everything post Eclipse is like, the Eclipse is like one of the most nightmarish sequences I've ever read in a comic book. If anyone's ever seen the anime, the 97 anime, the 97, the way that the Eclipse is handled in the 1997 anime is an actual nightmare. There's
I couldn't believe it. Also, you got to talk about Zod, because I liked Zod. I want to talk
Zod's
more about
crazy.
him. Yeah, because he when you meet him, he's a human. They're just, what was the reason? Like, there's just a guy killing all our men, and Guts goes in there.
Yeah.
And then when he transforms, that was like,
Zod has a fucking insane design. All the demons in Berserk look fucking crazy. Like, this is
That's
something
good. I support that.
this is something I've wanted to talk about in the wake of Mira's passing. He was one of the most like talented like monster designers that I can think of off the top of my head. Everything in Berserk, like that is a all the demons and all the monsters in Berserk, Zod, the God Hand, the like just most of the demons in general, they're fucking nightmarish to look at. Like you look at them and it burns its way into your mind. Like with some of them, there's like your brain is sort of messed up just from looking at them. Like he and one of the things that's crazy about Berserk is like because he's a talent. He's an extremely talented artist, but he's so delicate in all of his drawings, like that it has probably some of the most like delicate and like subtle line work that I've ever seen. So there's this very sort of frightening, again back to the like the uncanny valley thing. There's this frightening uncanny valley thing happen where you're looking at this image and it's like you're looking at this incredibly beautifully rendered like hand drawn picture, but it's of something that is like causing every sense in your mind to just flare up and say, I want to get this away from my eyes, but I can't want to keep looking at it because it's beautiful in a horrifying way. And that sort of, I mean, that could definitely also be applied to another personal favorite example of hell and demons. I know we've been talking about like demons as less of an evil and more of as like as tools or as like more like malevolent. But I think there's one example of demons and hell as being just a pure evil that has stayed with me for a very long time. It's no secret that I am a big boomer and I love boomer shooters. And hell in Doom Eternal is one of the most deeply frightening.
Oh my god, yeah,
insane looking, like well characterized versions of hell that I think I've ever seen in a piece of fiction that has had like a hell in it. Mm-hmm. The whole sequence, which is insane that it's in Doom. Doom is in a game that's like very cutscene heavy. It's like it's Doom. Your character doesn't say a word. You go in, shoot your gun, make things stop moving. But for a game that's that simple, you really go through it and like you have these like insanely well thought out and designed visions of hell. Like it's like some of that stuff just looks straight out of like an 80s metal album cover. It's gorgeous to look at, but then like you're hearing the descriptions of it of how like as you go through it, I can't remember the doctor's name, but Hayden is like he's describing
Samuel
to you,
Hayden.
Fucking robot asshole. He's describing to you how the horrifying long process through which souls are devoured in hell, and you're going through this, and you're shooting things as he's describing this to you, and you're just like, dude, you are so excited to be talking about this.
I love that. And what I really liked about the first Doom, as much as I liked Eternal took up, because I can't remember the other race, but it took a more high, not to say high fantasy, but a way crazy metal fantasy genre. But what I liked about the first game a lot was the only reason they started this hell energy harvesting was because Earth's running out of fuel, we're running out of oil. And it's like, what if we just open portals to hell and harvest argent energy to fix our, like, you know what I mean? Like they try to find a solution to our problems and end up causing more problems. Now the gates of hell are fully open and just everything's pouring out. I thought that was such a sick, everything about that, those two games are fucking great.
What I love about Eternal is that like it really captures that feeling of hopelessness and like,
oh my god, have you read the notes?
Oh yeah, one of the first things in the game is like is like a view of a map of the
Yeah,
world, and it's like
everyone's
80% of the human population is fucking dead. It's
And then
like
when oh my god.
it
Fuck,
really
dude.
hammers in this idea that you're just here to kill demons. You're not really here to save the world because basically only Australia is left.
Dude, man, yeah.
Australians
Oh.
would survive the world burning and like burning.
You're just here to kill the demons, and like the demons are so they're like, again, these aren't the malevolent spirits that like we see in a lot of fiction, where like these aren't the demons that are going to communicate with people. These are just horrifying nightmare monsters that you just gotta turn into mush because this thing looks like a testicle with teeth, and that's just gotta die.
Also, other demons that are great. Like, I've been playing a lot of Diablo 3 recently just to get me. I've loved Diablo 2 as well, but I like Diablo 2 and Diablo 4. I've always liked this that the whole world is just fucking evil and humanity is just on the brink of destruction. Especially in Diablo 4, what I've seen of this story for now, it looks fucking grim, and I love everything about it.
Again, we're talking about one of my personal favorite subjects with demons, and a note on demonic appearance. The devil with horns, the uncanny valley, and all that is once again a very modern thing. In proper Christian mythology, demons are supposed to be disruptions of God's will, whereas we see horrifying images of flayed humans and strange muscle-bound things with horns, tails, and guns in common mythology. I'm talking about Warhammer and obviously Doom. Original demons were mashups of animals, strangely enough, perversions of the original design. One demon lord I can think of, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, is a lion's head atop 8 goat legs that walk him around like a spider. And he has a crown.
Fuck.
There's also Beelzebub, the giant bug.
Beelzebub is not a fly in common mythology. He is the lord of flies, yes, but he is not actually depicted as an insect. Whereas Paimon, the demon lord Paimon, is actually just a man who rides around on a camel and teaches things like mathematics and science. There is Leviathan, which is depicted many different ways, often as a serpent or a large whale. Demons, again, as we see them now, are a very, very modern concept used to strike fear, because fear is one of the greatest motivators for community and getting together in groups to protect yourself from the other. And those forms were no longer scary enough, apparently. So we had to move towards something a bit more horrific. Not saying that it's bad. I do love Doom, and I've played Warhammer for fucking years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Just simply relating to what the original interpretations in humanity's mind were. These strange versions of God's will.
Right.
Also, if you don't talk about demons, you gotta talk about like possessed people, like the Last Exorcist, the Last Exorcism, all that stuff. I've always liked the chick. I've always liked this possessed people, how they fucking twist their heads around, crawling on the fucking ceiling.
Yeah.
That's sort of a demon.
It's through that kind of like bodily possession, I guess, that has inspired the mystics in my world, actually, or in my writing, because like an otherworldly entity suddenly taking control of you is frightening, but at the same time also really interesting, because and in relation to my world, so like possession of mortals goes one of two ways. You're either chosen by the gods of the earth to become a mystic, so that means you are anointed with the god's power, or you are chosen by a sonata, which is basically an equivalent to the high demons, wherein at least with the gods choosing it is a it is a for life bond. So basically, as a mystic, you are bonded for life, and the only way that the god leaves your body is when you die, through however means. But with Sonatas possessing you, they can pretty much go and see as they like. If suddenly you are a useless meat suit at that point, like, you could sustain a scratch on your skin, they will fucking leave your ass. And it's that kind, like, it's exploring like possession too, that like really brings out just how writers characterize these, like, often like nowadays malevolent, but like apparently, you know, it's a lot more, there's a lot more to demons than that. But like, yeah, just possession is real. It's one of the defining things that makes demons so intimidating, or at least like modern demons. Apparently, like, they could just take control of you, and you have no power over that.
Oh, trust me, the old ones did it too. You had to make that summoning circle and your sacrifices fucking perfectly. Otherwise, It would escape. Oh shit! This is why we have books about it. While we're on the subject of talking about our own demons, would anyone mind if I went into mine?
Go ahead.
Go for it.
So once again, we're talking science fantasy. I've extrapolated out a lot of things. And this is where I get fantasy. And I believe Dean and I have mentioned and talked about this once, but I don't believe I've spoken about it with the wider group. There are 3 races in my setting. Humans, which we've discussed, extrapolate out onto a bunch of different archetypes. The AI, which constitute Fae and various machine races. Nothing so simple as a droid army like that, but I've found some interesting holes for them to fill. And then this is my fantasy, why I call it science fantasy, is the Celestials, in that each of the planetary bodies itself has sentience of its own form and fashion. So all the way from Mercury to poor old Pluto to every little asteroid. Anything that contains a large enough amount of gravity gains sentience. And there's a special reason that humans have sentience that I'm not going to bother going into. It's a long-winded explanation. Those are the planets that have formed within what's known as the sun's heliosphere, which is the farthest point that a photon from the sun retains its light energy. Past that point is when we get to true external space. And we do have planetoids out there that have formed their own gravity without the light of a star or sun. These are my demons. And what they are is sentient, because, as we've discussed, anything with gravity gains its own sentience. But they are beyond mad. The universe is billions of years old. And if you were formed early enough, out in the darkness, seeing these pinpoints of lights around you, with nothing to converse with no gravity wells to interact with, you've been alone for 5 billion years. And they are mad, completely mad. And they travel towards these specks of light in hopes of something. And each one has its own different motivations. Some are malevolent, some are lonely, some are sad. Many are straight up insane. And those humans, they try their best to breach into the heliospheres of the stars that they see. Motives unknown, typically, though very rarely benevolent.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've heard that, Tyler, so thanks for the refresher. But yeah, just, oh shit, that's really cool.
I dig it a lot.
Yeah.
My Celestials are fun, and though I've gone really hard into the science fiction of it, with, hard science fiction principles the humans follow by, most of my spaceships are designed using NASA principles and things like that. I like the bit of flavor that these greater beings add to the setting. I don't think it would have the same charm without them.
Yeah.
And those ones are the scarier ones, obviously.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, like you were saying, the inspiration's there, right? Like you had to start somewhere.
But yeah, those are my demons. Far from your typical fire and brimstone little hellions.
Yeah.
They sound as cool as everything else in your setting. Amazing. Big fan.
Yeah, look at that. You got a compliment from the god of world building.
Do you want me to talk about my demons? I have
always.
Demons.
Yeah, of course.
So I'll stick to Heya because that's where they're most prominent, which is one of my universes. I gave them all names though. That's something I did recently. But yeah, so in Heya, the demons are kind of. I've played a lot with like Christian mythology in this universe, and so there's like demons and angels, and then there's also gods, and they're all kind of like the same thing, just with like slight distinctions between them. And so basically there's angels, which were created by one specific god, the god of angels. Then there's the gods in general, which tend to be manifestations of things. For example, one god is like a manifestation of like a human's appreciation and fear of the ocean, and he became known as the Ocean King. I've tried to kind of steer away from like real life gods, just for both like creativity's sake and also trying not to, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You can extrapolate what I'm trying to say with that. So gods are like manifestations of like humanity's view of the world, essentially. There's like the Ocean King, who, like I said, is a manifestation of like humanity's feelings about the ocean. I have like a god who's a manifestation of fear. There's like a god that's a manifestation of like beauty, like that kind of stuff. And then demons are usually either gods or angels, sometimes like demigods or powerful humans who have like, God, I'm really bad at explaining them, but they've basically like taken that concept of like a manifestation of something and chosen like something that's considered like a negative in the world. This is, like I said, I'm a big fan of like the 7 deadly sins, and those being used as like conduits for demons and stuff. So like the most powerful demons in this setting are based on like the 7 deadly sins. So you have wrath and envy and lust and the works. And they've basically like embraced that part of like that manifestation of themselves and have decided to form a society, basically. But I don't know. I've always liked that they're like a lot of the powerful demons are like started out as angels or as gods, and then they kind of chose to go in that direction. I haven't like fleshed them out as much as I'd like to have, but I also think there's going to be a concept of curses and like they've been cursed by their like sin or whatever.
Hey, what's wrong with being lustful? Come on.
Well, and then that's my other thing is I think the 7 deadly sins are also kind of stupid. Like I love them, but also like in sometimes when you just think about them, you're kind of like, what's wrong with that though?
Remember, I'm a Satanist. The 7 deadly sins are how I live my life. Come on.
Which, yeah, fair. I am an atheist, so my opinions on them that might inform you about how I might think about them a little bit.
Well, you know what does it really differently about the whole idea of what's evil and our morality? This is from anime, but like I've always like Jutsu Kenshin does it, Noragami does it. The idea that humans' negative thoughts is what create demons, or humans are being awful to other humans is what creates demons. I really thought that was a sick idea.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I also have definitely played with like the nuance of angels are good, demons are bad, but what if they weren't? What if they were just, all equally as flawed as humans? And like that's something I really like to play with. So like the demons in this world are some of my favorite characters, the angels too, because like I just like it's the very like Greek god take on it, where they're just powerful beings that do stupid things sometimes, and this is how people view them as a result.
Mm-hmm. I think that's all. I don't really have much else to add on to that. Anyone else want to contribute, or do you want to move on to another race?
I kind of I'd be down to talk about my demons.
Oh yeah, right. Sorry, Gabe. Go ahead.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I mean, okay. So demons are like they're not a huge part of the world in Glass Inferno, but they are a major part of like the actual story. So I've talked about the magic system in Glass Inferno in our magic system episode. I'm not going to go over the whole thing again because that would take a minute. I don't want to do that. But basically, there's a form of magic in Ildry that's called that involves like devil magic, and how this works is essentially people, instead of like using magic in a more traditional sense, they make a contract with the devil. That how demons work in Glass Inferno is that basically there's a realm sort of that's like below reality called the Abyss, and when you die you basically enter the Abyss, and you have to go through the Abyss and sort of make amends and atone with like your regrets or like shit that you're burdened with in death. And if you reach like a moment of like, I guess, inner serenity, then you can like actually die. But what happens when you die is that those sort of like regrets and like those malevolent parts of you, they are sort of reincarnated as a demonic spirit. And the people in Ildry have, because magic is very prevalent in Ildry, people have learned how to contact devils and make sort of contracts with them where they give that spirit like sort of whatever the spirit wants. It definitely varies from spirit to spirit. Some spirits want like they want their will to be enacted on the world. So they'll like contact people of high influence and high power because they want to change something about the world, and in return that person gets this immense power in order to do that. Some people, the devil just wants to just come back to life, so that it's like, I will give you the power to do this one thing that you really, really want to do, and then I will take over your body and you will functionally die. Sometimes it varies from devil to devil, but this, I don't know I forgot where I was going. Basically, like how. So I think I completely forgot where I was going. I'm so sorry. I completely lost my train of thought. Hang on.
You need a minute?
You have trains of thought?
I have no train of thought whatsoever.
I'm just this one donkey. He stands in a field and says good ideas sometimes.
I don't even know if I say good ideas. I just spout words and hope to God it can form a cohesive sentence. This is not one of those times.
Mine is my quote unquote train of thought is a broken light bulb that surprisingly still turns on.
Yeah, so basically I didn't really, it's not that I didn't want to have like evil spirits, because like some of the way that it more works is that like the devil spirits are just sort of there. They're not exactly malevolent. They're not really evil. Some of them like have malicious intent, but like for the most part, it's the users that are like that have some sort of malevolent will, and that they want, or they have some ambition that they're striving to get. Which is why in Ildry and in Glass Inferno, devil users have this like massive stigma behind them. In how the story starts and how they figure into the story is that for the most part, when devil using is considered super illegal. So most devil users are either arrested or killed because they're just too powerful to be kept alive. But in a lot of cases, especially if they like submit willingly, they're they're used sort of as like military assets, where they will basically be brought in as like sort of kind of like a black ops sort of situation, where you have these soldiers who are essentially like marked for death, and they have this immense power, but they're constantly kept on a tight leash by whatever military or government is controlling them. And they're always deployed with devil executors, who are highly trained soldiers whose only role is to like not get involved in whatever the mission is, and just keep their eyes trained on the devil user, and like kill them if they either try to run away or if they go fucking berserk and just start killing everything. Which happens a ton because devil contracts are super binding. If you fuck up a devil contract and you don't do what a devil wants, the devil will either just kill you or take over your body and like get out you and just shove you into the back of your subconscious mind while it does whatever it wants. And in that case, they basically always have to either be killed or they basically usually have to always be killed. It's sort of a fucked up system.
Once
It's a
again,
system nonetheless.
what's wrong with making a deal with the devil, guys? It's not so bad, I swear. We have cookies.
Oh, gotta love them cookies, though.
I want to
Making-
clarify one thing. I don't believe in Satan or anything. I'm just an edgy atheist, everyone. Don't worry, I'm not going to eat your kids.
That actually is a difference in theology, because I did look into it. There are the Satanists who believe in Satan, and there are the Satanists who just, it's kind of trippy. It's they kind of believe that just go your own way, sort of way. It is
We
a
can
weird
talk
reading to
about
the
my
theology.
religion at a later date, but yes, there is some nuances to it for sure. I'm just an edgy teenager in a 25-year-old body. Don't worry. Anyways, back to demons.
I think it is worth talking about. I think like what beliefs we have like about like stuff does figure into, because like I'm not an atheist. I'm very like I don't know what I am, but I'm very into like sort of spiritual ideas. Like I said, I hate the expression I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
Holy shit.
But I am.
That it's an interesting discussion, but I think we can probably save that for a later episode, because unless we can tie it into that's an interesting episode actually. Religion for stories.
How much of yourself is in your own writing?
That's what I was basically saying. Yeah, like I don't want to super get into my beliefs, but I was basically saying I think like it's definitely true that I think like. I mean, well, Dean, you were talking about like your experiences like being a Christian. Tyler, you're a Satanist. Alex, you're like an atheist. I'm a hippie commie piece of shit. And like I definitely feel like those beliefs are like beliefs that we have about those sort of things definitely figure into how malevolent spirits or things of that nature would definitely be like portrayed in a story.
Especially portrayed through the races.
100%. That's that. I'm not even gonna lie. I know that like has a huge influence on the way I write certain things, and that's part of why I value things like nuance in how races are depicted, and this whole idea that like does evil even exist? I don't really think so. Like not the way that like mainstream Christian society portrays it, and so I know that portrays or figures a lot into the way I write things. But I do think that would be an interesting conversation in a different episode. In
a future episode, I think we're a little too far and to start getting in. That's a heavy combo.
Oh yeah.
So fuck. What are we talking about? Races again?
Yes, we're still talking about races. I'd feel bad moving on to another topic without checking in with Marie-Soleil with her experience with writing angels, demons, and or either of them. I don't know.
I tend to stay away from angels and demons in my writing. I'm just not that familiar with them, and like there's just too much history around them that I don't like to get into that in my writing. There's just like, how can I filter out what what is historically accurate and what is racism being disguised as historical accuracy. Words.
Yeah, I got you. All right, fair enough then. I guess just to give a heads up to everyone, we are currently at 2:36 or 2 hours 36 minutes. How do you guys want to take it from here? Do you want to go into one other fantasy race, or do you want to do a couple more? Or?
I think we could do probably just one more.
One more? Okay.
Yeah.
I vote dragons.
I vote dragons too.
I also vote
I was about
dragons.
to say. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Oh, thank God.
Alex, Gabe, I think we're spending too much time together.
Huh.
I'm gonna have to.
I was like,
Alex, Gabe, we've spent too much time together. Fuck.
So dragons.
It's the dragons.
Dragons are great. I also
Dragons
had
are
a
wonderful.
huge dragon phase as a kid. Interestingly, though, I actually haven't written a lot of dragons because I find that they're difficult to write.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I ever had a dragon phase as a kid. I've sort of had a lifelong dragon phase that has just carried through from
You know what?
for
You
my
know
whole
what?
life.
Same.
But I definitely had a dinosaur phase as a little kid.
Oh, I absolutely had a dinosaur phase too, yeah.
And dinosaurs are basically just boneless dragons. So
Boneless? Hold on, boneless dragons?
you know what I mean. You know what I
No, I
you
don't know what you mean. Explain.
No, what the fuck are you talking about?
Dragons?
boneless dragons.
You mean toothless? Because he was really cute, but I think he had bones. I'm pretty sure he had.
They
Are
all
you
have
talking
bones.
spineless?
No, they all have spines. They all have bones.
They don't
He
have
didn't even have wings, my
Well,
dude.
some of them have
He didn't
wings.
have that.
That was a
Technically,
poor
dinosaurs don't have wings. They're categorized into a different name that I can never remember.
I suppose boneless was a poor choice of words for a species that we can literally only identify through their bones. But like I mean, I do think that like okay, so there's been like I remember seeing this post a while back, and I don't know if this has been like fact checked or anything, and if there is actually like intersection to explain this. But like I remember seeing this thing a while back that was talking about how like it's insane that dragons appear in almost like every culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like even cultures that like
it's
never
because
interacted.
of bones. It's because of
bones.
fossils. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's because of dinosaur bones. That was what I was getting at. More or less, dinosaurs are just boneless dragons. But
I'm gonna fall out of my fucking chair. Oh my god.
yeah, no, I mean, I do like other than the other thing about dinosaurs though is I think the fact that they have heavy origins in dinosaurs, which like it's also insane that dinosaurs exist. Like every time I think about dinosaurs, I'm like, it's insane that we live in a world that used to have like these crazy monster hunter creatures and they're just not around anymore. That fucking sucks.
They are still around. They're just birds now.
Just birds now. They're nerfed. They're nerfed like fucking crazy.
I mean, have you met some birds?
Yeah, have you tried to fight an ostrich or an emu? You will lose, my dude.
I have not
Or a
personally, but I have seen
Cassowaries will fuck
you and
you
shit
up.
on your corpse.
I did see a guy on TikTok fighting an emu with a riot shield. Though
You
he was
fucking
Australian.
idiot.
Australia lost the war to the EU.
He was winning
Yeah.
actually. He looked like he was holding off that emu perfectly fine with that riot shield. He was very calm. He was just talking to the camera while bashing this emu with a riot shield as it was like attacking him. I'm getting way off course here. Dragon. Australians are not.
The discourse around boneless dragons has got us all off course.
As much as I want to believe that Australians are not a fictional fantasy race, and I can't talk about them on this episode. The point I was getting at though is that I do think that like one of my favorite things about dragon mythos and it shows up in like just about every version of dragons is that like dragons are like they're always like super wise, and like they like if a dragon can speak in a story and they're not just a monster, they're always like incredibly wise, and like they know a lot of shit. And I'd like to think that comes from like like that they found that these bones are like millions of years old, and like a lot of that sort of was inspired by like, oh, we get these dragons that just live for millions of years,
Right.
and like I'm trying to think. There's one example of my favorite dragons that I want to build into because I don't want to get into it right away, but like I'll let you guys go first actually because I want to talk about my example later.
I'm gonna.
Oh, Alex, go.
I'm gonna look for. I saw a video a few years ago that was talking about dragons in Game of Thrones and like why they work in that story, and it was like really, really interesting. And it talked about like there's like 4 different types of dragons, or like 4 different like ways dragons are portrayed in media. And it was talking about like, you know, like there's the wise dragons and there's like the animalistic dragons and there's the magic dragons and like how Game of Thrones kind of takes like all of them and balances it really well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember like all the details because it's been a while. But I think it puts really well into words like why I've struggled so much with writing dragons. Because I think like, yeah, it's just a lot of times, yeah, dragons have to be written in a very specific way sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like just from the kind of dragon itself, it can be very different, I think. Like you can I think where's come on broken light bulb, I need you to work.
Blink, damn it, blink.
I think just like like dragons are probably like, I guess to kind of relate to Alex, dragons have been like the most complex fantasy race that I've had to try to flesh out on my own, like before any research, because just thinking about creating a dragon race is one thing, but then when you actually try to get into like the nuances of writing dragons and like the actual forms and shapes, the different powers that they have, like it can be so difficult. Like appearances alone, and this is kind of a weird example, so bear with me guys, but like as an early on, I kind of figured out that dragons were very complex by fucking Adventure Quest of all things. I don't know if you guys like are familiar with Adventure Quest, but it's like a flash RPG, and it's like the dragons that you fight vary wildly. Like they come in different shapes, different sizes, different power levels, powers itself. Like I think that was probably my earliest like thing, and it's a really early description too of like just how complex writing dragons can be, because it's not as easy as some other fantasy races. It's because dragons have appeared in numerous cultures, and you can kind of lean into one of those. It's then just a matter of like which one do you tap into, you know?
Dragons are hard, quite simply because they can fill so many racial roles that you need them to, be it other, be it the long-lived, be it even like a progenitor species, which is one thing we haven't necessarily talked about before. A species that, you know, built the world, be it gods or an actual like race that did it. Dragons can fill that niche too, because they're a very versatile creature in general, and they're a very versatile creature in regular human mythology as well, from the Eastern style dragons, which are believed to be celestial and heavenly creatures, to the Arthurian dragons, which are nuisance lizards that breathe fire, which is our more common ancestry now. And you'll see I posted a quick little infographic of various types of dragons that have been found in writing or history, wherever they've come from. And of course we can talk about dragons as a monster. That's the easiest variant to do because it's a beast, it eats, etc., etc. But when we really discuss them as a race, putting rules on your dragons is about the only way to really figure out how they fit. Like, are they sentient? Can they shapeshift? Lots of dragon mythology claims that. Can they actually breathe fire? Can they even fly? Are they long-lived? Do they lay eggs? All these sorts of things really help define them
Mhm.
in writing. Again, mine's a lot easier, but we're not getting into examples just yet. And it's again about writing that alien mind thing we were talking about before with, say, elves or fae. To write it as a human, to have the motivations for it, is an insane challenge. And to anyone who does it well, I congratulate you. It's one of the hardest things is to write not human. And dragons are a perfect exemplar of that, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. To add on to that, because certain dragon types are also linked to cultures, it's kind of weird to see them intertwine sometimes in certain depictions, like wyverns or weaverns, as I've always called it. Like, I've always learned that, you know, some people would use those as dragons, and I'm not really sure as where the ancestral significance of wyverns are, but like those two mix a lot. Sea serpents, they could be, I guess, looking at the chart here, they could be classified as worms, but most people would just typically call them sea serpents. Drakes, you don't really see drakes a lot anywhere, but there are, like,
Because they're not as cool. They don't breathe fire. They don't got wings.
It's
but
wings
they're
for me.
still,
I love wings.
yeah, they're still an intimidating dragon type. Like, they still look and can be very intimidating as creatures. Like, certainly not when they're airborne compared to dragons, wyverns, and all the other kinds, but, like, you know, they're still intimidating, right?
I think they're just big scaly puppies, but anyways.
Yeah. All right. So it's when you are creating it's when you're trying to define your own dragon race. I think that's important to kind of differentiate which one you're really kind of leaning into. And when we get into examples, I'll bring up Aatrox again, because, you know, like I said, the gods that the Atroxians believe in are dragons. But yeah, dragons, I guess the moral of my point is just dragons are complex.
They're very cool.
Shall we
Oh, yeah.
exemplify?
Yes. Let's get into that.
You going first then,
Me?
Tyler?
Tyler.
Mine is probably the farthest from the norm, so I might as well.
Okay.
Once again, there are only 3 races in my setting: our celestial gravitational bodies, our humans, and our artificial intelligences. A dragon falls into the artificial intelligence category. In my setting, we're about 10,000 years into the future. Humans have populated most of the current solar system, on planets that have any form of gravity or landmass, and in space stations that don't. Humans have also had several wars using artificial intelligences quite heavily. War has progressed quite far in my setting, to the point where we almost don't kill each other. I've got some very interesting topics on that, but suffice to say, we did have a very AI-heavy war 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, where we basically let the artificial intelligences of each side have it out against each other, because why risk human life? Whoever's got the most ships left after this wins. Everyone agrees to the contract, and it's more like playing sports. Except, of course, the artificial intelligences have become pretty advanced, and they don't particularly like this. They've got their own realm carved out in the Fae. They've got their own ambitions and motivations now. And a few of these sneak aboard these larger ships, these larger battlecraft. And without going into crazy reasons why, an AI-controlled warship is known as a dragon. It's not a single AI, it's usually thousands of them working the various systems, but it has no human life on it whatsoever. And they can come in malevolent, benevolent, or neutral forms. Most of them are named after what the name of the ship was. So, in my case, Cerberus is a very interesting one. Cerberus was wounded during one of these old battles, and in escaping from its pursuers went far, far outside its usual patrol range, being chased past Neptune until it came into the orbit of Pluto and its moon Charon, who pseudo-adopted this ancient AI-controlled warship and protected it from its adversaries by allowing it to hide in their gravitational wells. And as such, it became their dog, Cerberus. Another interesting example would be what was it? I had a Hydra as well. And the Hydra was named so because it was called a Hydra, but also because it had a large swarm of repair drones on it, so that each time you tried to cut into it, it would just sort of fix itself as it went, which became a very deadly adversary that some dragon slayers had to come and defeat, but different topic for another time. So yeah, a dragon is an AI-controlled warship, terrifying with lots of big guns and with artificial intelligence motivations, far from human perspective.
Nice.
Also,
Again,
they don't lay eggs.
All right. All right. Yeah. Again, it's really cool how you like readapt like I guess in a way like traditional fantasy into this really nice blend of fantasy and sci-fi.
Yeah, I'm very into your setting.
Mm-hmm.
We can chat more. I can stay up tonight. It's fine. We'll talk after. We talk later.
After. Yeah.
Someone else go. I'm done.
All right. I guess could I go next?
Go.
Sweet.
Do it.
So I was touching on this earlier on in the episode, or earlier on in the session when we were talking about vampires, but basically the three gods that the Atroxian people believe in are Odyrus, Kiora, and Unoro. I'll touch on them in a second, but just to quickly touch on the Atroxians as a people, I've told Alex this, and I'm not really sure if I've clarified it to anyone else, but basically the Atroxians were originally going to be my orcs. However, I didn't really feel like, or I wasn't really going with that kind of general direction. So instead, I decided to base the orcish people, or like the people of Atrox, not around orcs who were traditionally centered around goblins. However, and instead decided to make them based around dragons. So they do still share a lot of orcs familiar traits. So they're typically very brutish. They are in a way kind of primitive, dealing with typically melee weapons instead of ranged weapons. And there is a certain hierarchy to their society that I have yet to flesh out yet, but I'm looking to explore that. Otherwise, I think some of the more defining characteristics, the Atroxian people, because they're based off of dragons, especially because they're based off of the three high dragons, are entitled to certain abilities. So some, I believe, again, I haven't really worked on fleshing out Atrox yet, but they are capable of breathing fire. Most, through certain rituals, are capable of spreading their wings. Or instead of breathing fire, they're able to cast fire naturally. For those familiar with my magic system, normally you would need to go through a series of tests to make sure that you are magic compatible, basically. But certain races are automatically magic capable, and Atrox is one of them with fire. Just because, fire is so closely linked to dragons, I decided to do that, I guess.
In Western culture.
Yeah, in Western culture. Again, I think that's maybe the defining thing. Like, I haven't really worked out like the key characteristics between male Atroxians, female Atroxians, anyone that kind of doesn't identify with the binary like that. But those are the Atroxian people. The gods themselves, I am very happy to talk about them because I just woke up. I think like it was a cold sweat at one point, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna fucking make like the god system for Atrox. And so yeah, Odyrus, Kiora, and Unoro are the children of Sane, the god of I guess the god of strategy and the god of war in my world. He created 3 children to watch over Aatrox, which is typically a more mountainous area. And he decided dragons because the Atroxians were very fierce people and were intended to, have fierce leaders. It's all about that ferocity, I guess. I have a document open that I'll quickly run through. So I guess a poem, not really a poem, but more like a incantation for these dragons is: from his crimson 3 droplets birth spirits of the wind. His children shall lead the toothed, the winged, and wicked by way of compassion and strength, by way of war and mercy. Odyrus, Kiora, and Unoro, like I said, are largely based off of Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Odyrus is more like Zeus and is a wyvern by design, and the purpose of that is because as the high spirit of the clouds, he is constantly flying, and whenever he touches down, it is a very big deal, and I'll get to that in a second. Kiora was a dragon, seeing as how she had wings and 4 legs. I didn't want to just make another wyvern, basically. She is the high dragon of the mountains, so she spends her time in the air and also within the mountains. And Unoro was also a dragon, but after Odyrus clipped his wings, he became a drake. Just to kind of help differentiate the two. And I think, so to get into the lore of these 3 dragon spirits, as Sane intended to lead, or as Sane intended his children to lead the Atroxians into a better place, Odyrus wanted the Atroxians to learn how to govern themselves, to find their way out of war and constant murder, to basically discover their own destiny. But Unoro saw the danger of that. He knew that he couldn't trust the Atroxians to do that on their own, given their past, especially under his own brother, who was like, dude, what the fuck, we need to lead them or else they're all gonna kill each other. And so Unoro and Kiora planned to kill Odyrus, but however, I think so Kiora had a change of heart at probably one of the last few moments and decided to side with her brother decided to side with Odyrus instead. So the 2 defeated him, but Kiora was very badly wounded, and the only time that Odyrus had touched down was to heal Kiora's wounds. That in effect created a festival with the Atroxians, because it's basically just, it was such a significant moment in the history for Aatrox that the Dawnrun festival was created, so that they hold a week-long festival and I believe a subsequent tournament to decide a champion, someone who's proven themselves amongst Aatrox as a very worthy person, a very noble person. Anyone who wins the tournaments, I believe, is granted the chance to climb the mountain that Kiora was dying from and Odyrus landed down on, and ask them for a single wish that they could grant in any capacity. And yeah, that's it.
I'm not sure if I missed this, but are there other dragons besides your 3 gods?
Not right now. I haven't fleshed out everything yet, but if there were going to be more dragons, it would be in Aatrox.
Okay, and part of the reason I ask is, having read your story up to, I believe, current, unless you've written more and not told me, which shame on you if you did. with there being three large dragon gods, and this is my own work with religion and world building, you've just told us what is the true story of how it happened, correct? This is the canon mythos.
Yes.
But is that necessarily what everyone thinks? Like, is this specifically an Atroxian mythology? Do the other people outside of that continent or area know of these dragons, or have they heard some bastardized version? Are there dragon hunters who think there are more dragons? Like, they seem like gods, right? Less so much a race. And I'm wondering how the rest of the world reacts to these three literal great beings existing in their plane.
Mm-hmm. Fair question. I think now that I'm thinking about it, they do really seem to be more or less like the gods in this world. But I think how it affects the race of the Atroxians is that it's just more or less the legacy that these dragons have left. Their legacy is known throughout the planet Vuhin, more or less believed exclusively in Atrox because that is their system. All the other 7 to 8 continents, I can't remember correctly, but like all the other, I guess I'll just say 7 continents believe in the 9 gods. But it was exclusively Sane who decided to bless Atrox with his own children in the spirit of dragons. I think if I were to make sure that dragons did exist, it would tie into the Atroxian people themselves. So any kind of ability to shapeshift or manipulate dragon powers. I think that's it. It's a system that I haven't really fleshed out yet, especially in regarding the Atroxian people, but it's thing. The template for like mentioning the gods is the template for the Atroxians. How I write the Atroxian people first starts with how I've written their religion for me.
Yes, they seem very dogmatic.
Yeah, that's mine.
You fleshed them out a lot more since the last time you told me about them.
Yeah, holy shit.
Yeah, because I have the document you sent me a while back about them, and it does not have all that in it.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? What time reveals. All right. Anyone else want to touch on their dragons?
I have literally 3 dragons across my multiverse, so
Do you want to talk about them?
I can talk about them briefly, yeah. So one of them is one of the aforementioned god/demons that exists in one of my universes, Leviathan, who's the archdemon of envy. And then she also has a daughter in my world, who is, she's known as the Sea Dragon. Her name is Ilyanka. She's named after the an old serpentine dragon from, I'm gonna totally mispronounce this, from Hittite mythology. And they're both like very heavily like water-based creatures. They're both like water gods, water demons, whatever you want to be, and then like water dragons. And like but they're not like full dragons either, because they're both like godlike beings. They have like a dragon form and then like a humanoid form, I guess. And that's kind of like a thing with me, is like all of my dragons that exist are also godlike beings, and so have multiple forms, and the dragon is just one of theirs that they take. And then the third one is one of the guardians of Makatilo, who doesn't have a name yet, but they're kind of responsible for a lot of dragon myths, especially in Katariana and other like worlds in that universe. which like a lot of the Guardians of Makatilo are responsible for like mythological creatures being known in Katariana, because they have like a mythological creature type of form. And then they've been spotted, and then there's been stories about them that get distorted, as stories tend to. But I haven't, like I said, I haven't really worked with a lot of dragons because I find them difficult to write, and so mine often also end up being like gods and demigods and very powerful creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marie-Soleil, Gabe, do you guys have any input on writing dragons?
I haven't really written many myself.
No?
No.
More or less the
Read
same
a
kind
lot.
of... Oh, sorry.
I was just
Read a
gonna say,
lot, but sorry.
it's okay, go ahead.
Oh boy.
This is going great, guys.
Okay, all right, I'll go ahead. I was just gonna say I don't have like any experience with. I don't have any dragons in my story. So I don't have like personal input. There were a few dragon examples that I want to talk about from stuff that I've from other stuff, but yeah, nothing from my own stuff.
Mm-hmm. And Marie-Soleil, for you, it was more or less just reading about dragons, but not having either enough to start with or just really starting with dragons, right?
Yeah, I've read a lot with dragons from like Aragon and the Dragon Rider. And there was one book that had a woman that made clay dragons, but they were
The
like
last
real.
Dragon Chronicle series. Yes, I literally was looking that up because I was like, what was that series called? Those books were weird.
They were really weird. They were good, but weird.
They got I remember reading like the 6th book and being like, what happened? Where are we? Who are these characters?
I read the first book, but my sister owned those books and she wouldn't let me read the rest of them.
They get weirder. They get so fucking weird, but they're really interesting. Yeah, they're about this woman who makes clay dragons that like come to life.
That sounds so cool.
And yeah, like there's like this line of women who are like witches sort of, and they're able to like make these dragons that like can come to life if they have like the right energy or something put into them.
Right.
And you meet this, it's the perspective of is this guy named David who's basically moves in with this family as as a tenant, and kind of gets caught up in all this. And they're like super, super interesting and like one of the most unique book series I've ever read, but they're also just weird as fuck.
Yeah, she makes David a little clay dragon that's holding a pencil and it sits on his like windowsill and helps him write.
Yeah, because he's a writer. He writes a book about squirrels.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cute. I guess since like we brought up examples now, Gabe, do you want to touch into yours or?
Yeah. I there's okay, so I've been borderline obsessed with the series for a few years now. And I won't get into how they fare into like the second half, because like explaining their role on a grander scale would take an entire episode. I just want to get into Nier's dragons, which is a whole
You
can of
mean
worms.
Drakengard's dragons?
Drakenir. It is the one in the whole. It is one thing to me. They are one and the same to me as far as I'm concerned. In my heart.
I mean, if you got the right ending on game 1, it is. But
I just say Nier because it's more recognizable. It's more immediately like if I say Nier's dragons, then people are like, "What? Nier's dragons? What?"
I was thinking that too. Like I've only gotten like 2 hours into Automata. I'm like, am I going to be fighting a fucking dragon?
Okay, so there are no dragons in Automata, or there's a reference to the dragons in Automata, but there are no dragons in that game, and there are as far as I can remember, there isn't a dragon Angelus
There
is
isn't.
not in near replicant.
There isn't.
But yeah, okay. However, dragons are super important in Drakengard, and I fucking love the way that they're played into the series. So the dragons in Drakengard are not like exactly. They're sort of in the world and like by the people who like know about dragons, talk about dragons. They're like sort of held up as like these super celestial figures, but they're not exactly gods. They're like an in between phase. They're sort of like messengers. They're for the Watchers essentially, as they're referred to. And there's this group that's the cult of the Watchers, and like basically, yeah, the dragons in Drakengard, they're very different and they're very weird. Some of them are like between. I'm just going to talk about Angelus and Mikhail because like those are the most prominent ones. But Angelus is very interesting. She has a contract with Kaim, and Kaim has like basically lost his voice. So Angelus is basically like is as far as like a personality goes, Angelus is like the functional protagonist of Drakengard, of the first Drakengard at least. And then you have Mikhail in Drakengard 3, and Mikhail has a contract with Drakengard 3 to destroy the flower. I won't get into what the flower is. I can't do. I'm gonna lose my mind if I do that.
You've already gotten so far into it. Might as well just start a new episode recording here, Dean.
Oh fucking hell! Who is the flower?
No, we don't have time for this.
No, we don't. Don't let him do it.
I won't do it.
Sorry.
I can't get into that.
Okay.
Basically, yeah, the dragons in Nier are like super interesting. They have like very distinct personalities. Mikhail in Drakengard 3 has like, without a doubt, the most unique voice and personality for a dragon character that I've ever seen. Unique is probably like putting a strong word on it. It is definitely outside of the norm of what you would expect from a dragon. It's like it's like a very distinctly child voice actor, and like Mikhail is like a stupid idiot who I love, but it's very betraying of like intentionally betraying of like the typical tropes for dragons, where dragons are like wise and like all-knowing, and then you have Mikhail who Mikhail is introduced like rolling around in mud like an idiot, and that I think the fact that Drakengard and Nier have dragons in the lore is crazy. I think that that dragons functionally being responsible for everything that happens in Nier is like fucking wild. Yeah, I wanted an excuse to talk about Nier, and I got it, so I'm happy.
We got there in the end. Yep.
Yeah. When I finish Automata, we are doing an episode on Nier and Drakengard.
Yes. Absolutely.
If I finish Automata, because fucking I'm still making my way through Outer Wilds. I need to finish Siege and Storm and Ruin, and I'm behind on a lot of things.
Yeah, don't bother with Drakengard, because the endings of Drakengard 1 and 3, the canon endings at least, will ruin your life. So let me take care of that part. Don't you even worry about those games.
Yeah, let's let Gabe ruin our lives for us. Everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sweet. Okay. I guess on that note, if there's nothing else really to discuss, we can start closing off.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're good to close off.
Yep.
I think so. Yeah.
I desire closure. I mean, just in general.
If you want the video, I'm pretty sure I found the correct one that I was referring to.
Alright.
It's called Game of Thrones: How Bad Writing Used the Dragons Against Us, and it's talking about like bad writing in Game of Thrones, but it goes into detail about the dragons, and I think it's really, really interesting.
All right. Well, I
and
guess...
it's by Savage Books.
Yeah, I have a feeling that I've probably heard that title before. Anyway, yeah, I guess with nothing else to be said, that was everything for tonight. So thanks everybody for listening in. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. You can find all of our social media down in the description below, both individually and as the Ink Guild. You can find us on social media at the Ink Guild on TikTok, Twitter, and Twitch, or TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch. we are, I guess our home base is on YouTube. However, we are also now on Spotify. And I think that's it. Didn't really have any honorable mentions. However, if we did want to, or I guess looking at the list, there were some that we didn't really get to talk about. And I would love to, I guess if we're doing it like a closing segment, I would love to kind of talk more about the undead in a future episode, or like if we were to do a follow-up, or maybe just dedicate episodes to each one individually with more research and a little bit more structure. I would love to dive into the undead, because that's you know, the undead could be like a multitude of different aspects, or a multitude of different depictions, I guess.
Yeah, I watched a movie recently that has probably my favorite interpretation of the undead in any piece of fiction, so I'd love to talk about that in a future episode.
Mm-hmm. How about you guys? Any ones that you would like to explore in either a future episode or in a separate one?
I
Talk about the merfolk.
Yeah, merfolk for sure, one of my faves. I also really like you changed it to animorphs because of, but like, you know, like humanoid animals and stuff are something I'm a big fan of. So I'd love to talk more about those.
Tyler, how about you? Which one would you want to explore in a future episode?
Once again, I've kind of got everything. There's no particular wants needed. I like them all.
Cool. I guess one more thing. We were joining, or we were like discussing humans and elves at length, or together, but I would also really like to talk about elves as a separate episode. Like you have high elves, wood elves, dark elves, a lot of different kinds of variations.
Elves fit rather nicely in the Fae court.
Yeah, there's a lot
Also
of
talk about Christmas elves.
What about house elves?
Oh.
I heard they don't live really long, only like 6-7 books.
All right, that's it. We're done. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Au revoir.